What if I told you that some of the greatest mysteries of our world are still waiting, hidden in plain sight? Tonight, we'll wander slowly into one of them. But before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if you'd like more journeys like this, don't forget to subscribe, so you'll always have a calm story to return to. Now, let's begin. It begins with a thought so fragile that it almost slips away the moment it arrives. What if the stars themselves were borders, invisible thresholds marking not just the end of our vision, but the end of belonging? We live inside a galaxy that cradles us the way a shoreline cradles the tide, and yet most of us never pause to consider its edges. The Milky Way, with its spiraling arms of dust and fire, is not endless, though it feels endless when we look up. It has a boundary, a faint rim where its stars grow thin, and beyond that rim lies a darkness even deeper than the one we think we know. For millions of years, life on this planet has unfolded with no awareness of that boundary, no suspicion that there is such a thing as an outside. Trees rise and fall, mountains are ground into sand, oceans exhale and inhale their tides, and yet all of it occurs inside this vast, rotating cathedral of light. We are children of the Milky Way, bound to it not by choice but by birth, because every atom inside us was built from its stars. And so the question stirs softly in the mind: what would it mean to step beyond the galaxy of our birth? To move not just between planets, not just between suns, but out into the blank, intergalactic night. The scale alone is almost impossible to hold inside the human imagination. Our galaxy stretches 100,000 light-years from end to end, which means that even if you traveled at the speed of light, faster than any ship we can dream of, it would take 100,000 years just to cross from one side to the other. And yet, even with its immensity, the Milky Way is only one of hundreds of billions, each galaxy floating like a lantern adrift in a sea that has no shore. And so to speak of leaving it is to imagine something beyond migration, beyond exploration, something closer to exile. Could we ever truly step outside of it? And if we did, would we recognize ourselves in that new silence? For to leave the galaxy would be to leave not only familiar stars, but the cosmic fingerprint of everything that shaped us. The isotopes that formed the iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones, the carbon that allows us to think. These are not universal, they are local. They carry the memory of particular stellar explosions, the chemistry of this one galactic nursery. Beyond the Milky Way, other galaxies hum with their own recipes, their own flavors of matter and time. Would a human built of different atoms still feel human at all? It is strange to imagine galaxies as homes, but in a way they are. Just as rivers draw boundaries for civilizations and coastlines shape the rise of empires, galaxies might be the ultimate shorelines of life. They give us the ingredients, the rules, the stage upon which existence can appear. And if galaxies are homes, then perhaps their edges are like doors we are not meant to open, thresholds that remind us of the finiteness of belonging. Yet still, the curiosity lingers, almost restless, whispering, what is outside, and why does it call to us? So quietly, outside the Milky Way there is no guarantee of comfort. The space between galaxies is not empty in the way a room can be empty. but empty in a more absolute sense. It is filled with a thin, cold mist of particles, stretched so far apart they almost forget each other exists. No suns, no warmth, no steady rhythm of orbits, only a darkness that does not end. To cross that void would be to cross a silence so vast that time itself might feel suspended. Could we carry our memory into such a silence, or would memory itself unravel like light fading before it reaches the next shore? Perhaps this is why ancient myths spoke of boundaries drawn in the heavens, not because people truly believed they could reach them, but because they sensed there is something fragile about crossing limits too large for the body to survive. We imagine the galaxy's edge the way early sailors imagined the end of the sea, a place where the maps would fall away and certainty would dissolve into wonder. And just as sailors eventually found new lands, maybe one day, far beyond the patience of our current species, minds will step across into that greater night. And yet another possibility stirs. Maybe the galaxy is not a border at all, but a kind of cradle we never truly leave. For even if we could step into the void between galaxies, even if we reached the next island of stars, we would still carry with us the fingerprint of this one, the way a child carries the accent of the place where they first learned to speak. Perhaps we never escape our origin, not because we are trapped, but because we are shaped, marked, and made permanent by it. So we drift in thought, imagining the edge of the Milky Way, picturing its arms thinning into space like the fingertips of a hand dissolving into shadow. We imagine standing at that threshold, watching the last star of our home dim behind us, and the darkness of another galaxy rising ahead. Would it feel like arrival, or like forgetting? Would we be pioneers, or would we simply become exiles, wandering a silence too large to ever belong to? And maybe that is the mystery. Not whether we can leave, but whether leaving would mean anything at all. For if galaxies are not cages, but memories themselves, then every step beyond them is only a deepening of the same question: where is home? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? Perhaps we have forgotten that the galaxy itself is not a solid thing, not a wall or a shell, but an ocean so wide it defies the ordinary language of space. Each star within it is like a single droplet suspended in a tide of light, and we, drifting here on our small world, are like sailors who never fully understand the water that carries them. To look at the Milky Way stretched across the sky is to see a river of brilliance, but to know it scientifically is to recognize that each glimmer is not close, not near, but unfathomably distant, each separated from the next by gulfs so immense that even light must strain to cross them. If we imagine it as an ocean, then the earth becomes a fragile raft, floating on a current we cannot see. The sun is a warm fire at the center of our raft, but beyond it, the sea spreads out without horizon. When we lift our gaze upward, we do not see the water of this sea, only the droplets, the countless sparks suspended like foam. And yet this ocean is not made of liquid, not made of air, not made of anything we can touch. It is built of photons, particles of light that have traveled years, centuries, sometimes millions of years, to arrive at the window of our eyes. Every night, the sky pours these ancient messages onto us. and we, without realizing, are bathed in their memory. But what does it mean to speak of crossing such an ocean? On Earth, to cross a sea is to leave behind one shore and seek another, to measure distance in waves and currents. In the galaxy, the waves are not of water, but of gravity, bending the paths of stars and weaving invisible streams of dark matter that guide their motion. The currents are the spirals of dust and gas, rivers of hydrogen slowly collapsing into new suns. And the shores, perhaps, the shores are only metaphors, for in an ocean of light there may be no true boundaries at all. Could it be that the very idea of a destination is an illusion, that the ocean of stars stretches without edges, adrift without a rival? When astronomers measure the distances between stars, they speak of light years. A light year is not just a number, but a unit carved directly out of time itself. The distance light can travel in 1 year. To cross the nearest star from Earth would take for such years at the speed of light, yet for us, with our fragile technologies, it would take tens of thousands of lifetimes. And as we imagine moving farther, outward, from the center of the galaxy toward its dimming edges, the gaps widen, the stars grow thin, and the sea itself seems to evaporate into a mist of almost nothing. Could a human mind endure such distances? Or would it collapse beneath the sheer weight of emptiness? In this vastness, astronomy becomes personal, almost intimate. For when we look outward into the night, we are not just gazing across space, we are gazing backward in time. Every star is a memory, every photon a messenger that has been traveling across the ocean for ages before it reached us. The light from some stars began its journey before humans learned to speak, before the first bones were laid down in ancient seas, before mountains we now call eternal had even risen. To look at the Milky Way is to look at fossils of light, suspended in the present, yet carrying the silence of forgotten epochs. And if each photon is a fossil, then we too are fossils of another kind. Our atoms bear isotope trails, signatures of ancient explosions, fingerprints of long-vanished suns. The ocean of light does not just surround us, it composes us, saturating our blood, our breath, our very capacity to dream. Maybe that is why we feel a strange calm beneath the stars, why their presence humbles us, not because they are distant, but because we recognize them in ourselves. Still, the question remains, can humans ever cross such an ocean? Not an ocean of salt and water, but one made of light, of silence, of entropy stretching outward without end. To cross would be to step into a medium we cannot drink, cannot breathe, cannot hold. It would be to sail a sea without winds, where the only propulsion is patience, and the only compass is memory. Perhaps we will never cross it, not because it is impossible, but because the ocean itself was never meant to be cross-accidentally, to be contemplated, only to remind us of our smallness. Or perhaps, one day, our descendants will find a way to ride currents we cannot yet imagine, weaving vessels from gravity itself, floating on tides of dark energy toward unseen shores. For now, we drift on the raft of Earth, surrounded by an ocean that asks no questions but offers endless wonder. And as we listen to its silence, a softer thought emerges. If light can travel across such emptiness and still be seen, what else might endure? What else, carried across time and decay, might whisper its presence in the quiet night? And if there are traces waiting just beyond what we see, then the question becomes softer still, almost impossible to resist. What would it take to reach them? To slip the bonds of this spiral ocean of stars, to lift ourselves not only away from a planet or a star, but from the very galaxy that shaped us. It is one thing to imagine stepping across water, one thing to imagine climbing mountains or crossing deserts, but it is another to imagine stepping beyond the pull of an entire galaxy. To do so is not only an act of distance, it is an act of escape. And escape is not just a dream, but a mathematics, a balancing of forces written into the very bones of space. Every object is bound by gravity wells, those invisible bowls of attraction carved into space-time itself. The Earth's well holds us close, and to leave it, a rocket must climb with enough velocity to break free from its curve. The sun's well is deeper still, holding planets in their courses, and to leave it requires speeds beyond anything we can yet sustain. But beyond these is the well of the Milky Way itself, a gravitational basin, vast and unseen, shaped not only by the visible stars and gas, but by the mysterious embrace of dark matter. Around the galaxy lies a halo of this invisible substance, stretching farther than the eye can see, exerting a quiet pull that no one can touch, yet everyone feels. To escape the Milky Way means to climb out of that halo, to push against the combined attraction of billions of suns. Astronomers tell us that the speed required is nearly 600 kilometers per second. Number so large it barely fits inside the human mind. It is more than 30 times faster than Earth orbits the Sun, more than 1,000 times faster than the swiftest plane we have ever flown. To speak of such speeds is to speak of a physics that exists far beyond our current reach, and yet numbers have a way of dissolving into wonder. For what they really tell us is how deeply we are woven into this spiral sea of light, how tightly we are bound to its presence. But escape is not only a matter of velocity, it is also a matter of momentum, of choosing the right path, of leaning into the orbits that already carry us. The Earth is not still. It is circling the Sun at 30 kilometers per second. The Sun itself is not still. It is drifting around the galaxy, kilometers per second. We are already moving, already participants in a great migration. We do not feel. To leave the galaxy, perhaps we would need not to fight this motion, but to extend it, to turn drift into flight, to ride the momentum of what is already happening. Maybe escape is less about building new speed and more about listening to the currents that already flow beneath us. And then there is the matter of dark matter itself. Though invisible, though silent, it composes most of the galaxy's mass, shaping its rotation, binding its stars. We cannot see it, cannot touch it, but without it, the galaxy would fly apart, its arms unraveling into the void. To escape the galaxy is to escape this unseen net. What would it feel like to pass beyond the reach of matter we cannot measure, to cross a border drawn by the invisible? Would there be a moment when the pull faded, a moment when the silence of intergalactic space felt suddenly different, as if the background of existence had shifted? Or would we drift outward without noticing, unaware that the galaxy's embrace had loosened, unaware that we were already gone? Physics gives us the equations, the speeds, the calculations of energy required. But the deeper truth is that escape is also a question of imagination. Can we imagine ourselves outside of what gave birth to us. Can we picture the Milky Way shrinking behind us into a single shape, a wheel of light glowing faint in the dark? Could we ever look back upon our galaxy the way we look back upon Earth from orbit, a small sphere that once felt infinite? If so, what would that do to our sense of home, of belonging, of history? Would we feel liberated or abandoned? Would we feel like explorers or like orphans of the spiral arms? And still another thought lingers. Maybe escape is not about leaving, but about understanding that even escape is relative. In the vast timeline of the universe, galaxies themselves are not permanent. They collide, they merge, they dissolve into new structures. The Milky Way is already moving toward the Andromeda Galaxy, drawn together by gravity's patient hand, destined to merge in billions of years. Perhaps then the question is not whether we can escape, but whether escape has meaning at all, when every shore eventually drifts into another. When every home becomes another home, so we return to the mathematics, to the quiet weight of velocity and momentum, and we realize that it is not merely a formula, but a meditation. To speak of leaving the galaxy is to speak of limits of physics, limits of imagination, limits of what it means to belong to a place so large it cannot be held in thought. Maybe escape is possible, maybe not. Maybe it is the dream of a restless species, or maybe it is the quiet fate written into every atom we carry. Atoms that once escaped the cores of stars themselves. For even we are built of escape, of particles that once broke free from collapsing suns, flung into space, cooled into matter, shaped into life. Perhaps that is the deeper mathematics, the recognition that we are already escapees, already wanderers, carrying the memory of cosmic flight. And if that is true, then the question is not whether we will leave the galaxy, but how far our inheritance of escape will carry us. For if even atoms can flee the fires that forged them, what else might slip its bonds? What else, across time and silence, might drift free? It begins with a thought so simple, it feels like a child's game, the kind of musing one has while folding a sheet of paper between their hands. What if 2 points in space, impossibly far apart, could be made to touch, not by traversing the endless distance between them, but by folding the space itself, until the separation dissolves? In the quiet mathematics of Einstein's equations, this idea is not fantasy, is geometry, whispered through symbols that describe the bending of spacetime like fabric under weight. The universe, in this telling, is not a void to be crossed, but a cloth that can be folded, stretched, and perhaps pierced. When Einstein and Rosen worked together, they found a strange bridge within the mathematics, a tunnel connecting one region of space to another, a passage hidden in the curvature of the cosmos. They called it the Einstein-Rosen bridge, but in our language of imagination, we call it a wormhole. It is an image that captures both delicacy and mystery, like a tunnel hollowed by a creature in the dark, unseen until the ground collapses. And yet this is not soil being burrowed, but space-time itself. A corridor carved not in matter, but in the invisible framework that carries galaxies and light. To picture it is to stand before a curtain, heavy and rippling, concealing another room we cannot enter. If you could fold that curtain until 2 distant points touched, you could slip through the fold rather than walk the long corridor. And so the wormhole becomes a fold in the curtain, of reality itself. A place where the separation between here and there may shrink to nothing. We do not know if such doors exist, but the equations permit them, and that permission alone feels like an invitation. The difficulty, of course, is stability. Just as paper collapses when pinched, just as tunnels in sand cave in under their own weight, a wormhole wants to close. The mathematics insists that such a tunnel would pinch shut before anything could pass through, its throat collapsing under gravity's insistence. To hold it open, one would need a kind of matter we have never touched, exotic matter, with negative energy, with pressure, unlike anything in the catalogue of particles we know. Does it exist, this strange scaffolding that could prop open a corridor between stars? We cannot say, and yet physics does not forbid it. There are hints, soft and elusive, that in the quantum froth beneath all things, negative energy does appear in whispers, in fluctuations that blink in and out, around black holes in the Casimir effect between plates. The vacuum itself hums with such strangeness. Could those fluctuations, multiplied, woven, sustained, be enough to hold a wormhole open? Perhaps, perhaps not. Science has not yet gathered the proof, but the imagination lingers in that space between certainty and wonder. To dream of wormholes is not merely to dream of shortcuts in distance. It is to wonder about time itself. If space can be folded, can time be folded too? If one mouth of the wormhole is dragged, accelerated, bent through the relativistic flow of time, could the other remain behind? Could the two ends of the tunnel become separated, not only by space, but by years? One could enter here, and emerge there, but also then. And suddenly, the fold in the curtain is no longer just a doorway across the cosmos, but a passage across epochs. And yet, would such a journey be survival, or would the self unravel in the crossing? If space and time are stitched together, then bending one bends the other, and perhaps our consciousness, bound as it is to continuity, could not endure the leap. The question is not just whether wormholes exist, but whether we, as fragile creatures bound to memory and causality, could ever step through them without dissolving into paradox. The human heart, though, is not bound by such limits of certainty. We imagine the impossible, not because we are sure it is true, but because the act of imagining enlarges the world. To think of wormholes is to sense, faintly, that the cosmos may contain more doors than walls, more veils than barriers. What if, in some hidden fold of reality, ancient stars already connect? What if the universe is threaded, not only with rivers of light, but with secret passages, silent as dreams, waiting for a traveler who dares to notice? And here, beneath the soft glow of these thoughts, time itself seems to slow. We realize that our lives are spent crossing distances between one day and the next, between birth and death, between memory and forgetting. Wormholes, in this way, are metaphors as much as mechanics. They remind us that not all journeys must be straight, not all separations eternal. There may be paths unseen, shortcuts across sorrow, folds in the fabric of experience that allow us to emerge in places we thought unreachable. So we linger with the idea, gentle as breath, of a corridor through the curtain. We do not need certainty, only the dream that space might hide passages within its silence. If wormholes are real, then distance itself is not what it seems, and perhaps even time bends in ways we cannot yet fathom. And if they are not real, if they exist only in the shimmering edge of equations and in the wonder of our minds, then they still serve their purpose. They remind us that reality is wider than we know, and that the curtain before us may be thinner than it appears. And yet, if a fold in the cosmos could erase the longest distance, if a doorway could make the farthest star as close as a whispered breath, then what else might lie hidden in the fabric of the universe, waiting quietly, waiting to be found? If humans marked their journey, what fossil would they leave in the void? Not in stone, not in seashells pressed by layers of sand, but in the silence of space itself, where no tide can wash them away, and no erosion of wind can shape their remains. What shape would memory take, drifting endlessly among the stars? The earth has always known fossils, the quiet bones of creatures that once breathed, the impressions of leaves that once caught the light of the sun, the shells of tiny beings that once drifted on ancient tides. Each fossil is a testimony that something lived, something happened, something passed through time and left a trace. Yet when we imagine the human story, a question unfolds like a slow horizon. What trace does a thinking species leave when its reach extends beyond the skin of its planet? Not only fossils of bone, not only ruins of stone, but technofossils, as some scientists call them, artifacts of technology that outlive their makers, cast adrift in the eternal dark. Already, such fossils exist, though they are not buried in soil, but floating through an ocean with no shore. Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10 and 11, New Horizons, fragile machines of metal, drifting farther than any bird, farther than any sail could ever carry. Each one is like a message in a bottle thrown into a sea so vast it has no horizon. They are not alive, and yet they are alive with meaning. They are not human, and yet they carry the fingerprint of human thought. Etched into their surfaces are symbols, maps, music, whispers of a species that dared to speak across the gulf. A golden record sails with Voyager songs, greetings, the laughter of children, the pulse of Earth itself, captured in sound. Perhaps no one will ever find it. Perhaps it will pass 1 billion years in silence, circling the galaxy long after Earth has forgotten the species that made it. But does that matter? Is a fossil valuable only if it is seen? Or is its existence enough? A silent witness in the void, waiting with patience no living being could endure. The cosmic rays will gnaw at them, slowly erasing the thin lines and grooves. The signals will weaken as they spill into space, stretching thinner and thinner until they blur into background noise. And yet, for a time, maybe thousands, maybe millions of years, they will be there, human fingerprints echoing in the emptiness. Not because humanity wished to dominate the galaxy, but because it could not help but leave a mark. Just as ammonites left their spirals in stone, just as trilobites pressed their armor into ancient seabeds, so too has humanity pressed its dream into the stars. But what about the signals, the invisible fossils? For more than a century, Earth has leaked radio waves into the sky, a faint bubble expanding at the speed of light, carrying with it fragments of human chatter, coordinates of wars and games, fragments of soap operas, the static of forgotten news. Imagine some distant being tuning into these echoes, not words, not meanings, but the faint pulse of intelligence in the static. Could it be that these signals, though fragile, form a kind of technofossil too, a shadow of a mind reaching outward, no different from the first carbon traces of algae pressed into ancient shale. And what of the future? What if one day humans build cities in orbit, machines on moons, networks across the dust of Mars, or the ice of Europa? Would those too, if abandoned, become fossils in cosmic time, ruins not of stone but of circuitry, skeletons not of bone but of metal frames, resting in silence as planets turn? Could the galaxy one day be littered with the remnants of species, each leaving their own fossils behind, layered not in sediment but in starlight? Perhaps that is what cosmic maps truly are, not just routes between stars, but layers of memory, marked not by rivers or mountains, but by the shadows of those who once dared to cross. Our machines, our whispers, our shadows folded into the fabric of deep time, as impermanent as smoke, yet as undeniable as the fossils of ammonites on Earth. And when we look at these human shadows cast upon the cosmic map, we cannot help but wonder, are we the first to draw them? Or are we only the latest to add a fragile mark to a page that has been turned countless times before? Maybe another species left its fossils once, long before us, now eroded into silence, unseen but not impossible. Maybe the galaxy holds not just stars, but forgotten echoes, technofossils that once told the story of someone else who reached outward and vanished. We will never know for certain. But perhaps that is what it means to leave a fossil, never certainty, only suggestion, only silence, shaped into memory. And yet, if this much can be left behind in silence, if a whisper can become a fossil drifting through the void, what else might one day carry our shadow across the maps of the cosmos? The Milky Way is not simply a galaxy, not simply a swirl of stars and gas across the night sky, but a kind of memory, a living archive, written in light and dust and gravity. Each star is a sentence in a story billions of years old. Each orbit is a rhythm, each collapse into a black hole, a quiet punctuation mark, almost like a breath held in the dark. And when we look up at it, lying in a field, or through the glass of a telescope, or even caught in the corner of our eye as a faint, pale ribbon above the world, we are not only seeing what is there now, but what was. Every glimmer is old light, delayed light, messages that have traveled across distances so vast that even the word vast feels too small to hold them. The galaxy remembers because it cannot do anything else. It is built on the traces of everything that has happened inside it. Supernova, scattering heavy elements into space, turning silence into calcium in our bones and iron in our blood. Gas clouds collapsing into clusters that shine for millions of years before dissolving back into the quiet medium between stars. Gravity weaving invisible threads so that even when a star is gone, its path still marks the fabric it once pulled upon. Memory is not a choice here. It is a law, written in physics, in thermodynamics, in entropy itself. And so we might ask, when we imagine ourselves leaving Earth, leaving the solar system, leaving perhaps even this spiral arm of the galaxy, do we remain in that memory, or do we vanish from it? If we are stardust, as we so often remind ourselves, then surely we are already inscribed. Every exhale of carbon dioxide, every flicker of electricity in our nervous system, every photon bouncing off our skin becomes part of the wider echo. But still, the question lingers. If we leave, do we erase the story of us from this grand archive? Or do we simply become another drifting annotation? Another faint footnote written in the faint glow of radio signals that may wander forever between the stars. Galaxies, after all, are not static shelves of history, not libraries where every book remains intact. They are more like oceans, always shifting, always erasing, always rewriting. A spiral arm is not a fixed arm at all, but a wave, a pattern, moving through stars that do not even know they belong to it. The gas and dust that create bright nurseries for new suns will someday disperse, pulled away into the long tide of galactic rotation. And the things that seem most solid, like memory, like permanence, are fragile here. What endures is change itself, the inevitability of dispersal, of transformation. So perhaps memory, on this scale, is not about perfect preservation, but about resonance. Maybe it is not about keeping everything, but about allowing certain vibrations to continue long enough that they shape what comes next. The iron from ancient stars did not remain inside their cores, but spread outward, seeding new systems, seeding us. The echo of their explosions lingers not as a photograph, but as the very possibility of our existence. Perhaps the Milky Way does not remember in the way a mind remembers by continuing, by passing forward, by embedding traces of the past into the bones of the future. And if that is true, then our question changes. The concern is not whether we vanish or remain, but how we resonate. Do we scatter something useful, something that might become part of another story, another being, another civilization, looking up at their own sky? Or do we fade into noise, signals to faint, to random, too easily lost in the cosmic background? Perhaps both are inevitable. Perhaps every life, every species, every planet is both a note that rings and is forgotten, a wave that crashes and yet still shifts the shoreline ever so slightly. It is humbling to imagine ourselves as so small within such a system, and yet so necessary. Without the countless quiet contributions of stars that lived and died billions of years ago, there could be no us to wonder, no us to ask these questions in the dark. And so maybe the Milky Way's memory is not something outside of us, but something we are already within. We are the echoes, the resonance, the continuation of what it has always been doing, remembering, not by holding still, but by becoming. And yet, if this much can be remembered, if this much can ripple forward into new forms, then what else might the galaxy still be carrying, hidden, waiting, softly echoing beyond what we can see? There is a place where the galaxy begins to thin, where its spirals no longer shine with crowded suns, but drift apart into lonely embers. Out here, distance feels heavier, time seems slower, and the dark itself grows thicker, as if silence were gathering density. We might imagine this rim of the Milky Way not as a border, but as a slow unraveling, where the order of stars yields to something less certain. Entropy does not roar at the edge, it whispers, and yet its whisper is enough to undo entire systems. Entropy, the quiet arrow of time, tells us that nothing remains ordered forever. Stars burn down their fuel, galaxies lose their shape, and even memory itself fades, pulled toward forgetting. At the galactic edge, entropy is not just an equation. It is visible in the faint scattering of light, in the spaces between things that were once bound but are now loosening. The spiral arms, so crowded and bright near the center, unravel into threads of faint suns, barely tethered by gravity. The farther out you drift, the less the galaxy seems to care if it holds you here. Entropy is not a catastrophe, but a slow surrender. The heat death of a single star is almost imperceptible, but multiply it across billions, stretch it across eons, and you begin to sense the scale of this cosmic energy leaks. Gradients flatten, contrasts dissolve. The universe loves contrast, hot against cold, light against shadow. Yet entropy asks that everything balance, everything fade toward sameness. Out here on the rim, you feel that pull most deeply, as though the night itself were smoothing the sharp edges of existence. And maybe, in a way, this fading resembles us. For our own memories carry entropy. Stories scatter, languages vanish, cultures dissolve into fragments. The laws that govern the stars also govern the mind. Order tends toward disorder, unless someone tends it carefully. A fossil erodes into dust unless stone protects it. A story vanishes unless a voice repeats it. Even love, unspoken, falls away into the background hum of time. Out here on the edge, it becomes impossible not to think of entropy as more than physics. It is a kind of forgetting stitched into the fabric of reality. Imagine standing there, on an imaginary shore of the galaxy, where the last stars gleam, like lanterns left behind in a vast and empty field. The silence would not be total. Photons still fly, particles still move, but to the ear of consciousness it would feel like stillness so deep that even thought hesitates. Is leaving the Milky Way also stepping into this deeper loneliness? Or is it stepping into truth that all things, even galaxies, are temporary gatherings of energy, destined to scatter? Some physicists say that entropy is not destruction, but transformation. The order does not vanish. It only reshapes into patterns, more diffuse, less obvious. Heat spreads, atoms scatter, and in that scattering, new possibilities arise. Perhaps the loneliness at the galactic rim is not emptiness, but preparation, a vast clearing for what comes next. If galaxies themselves disperse, could the universe be opening a path toward something beyond galaxies, beyond stars, beyond the familiar architectures of light? And yet, we feel the melancholy of it, not because we fear endings, but because we live within them. Every breath is entropy. Every heartbeat is the body spending energy it can never recover. The law does not relent. Even as we dream of eternity, the universe measures us in moments of unraveling. Perhaps this is why the stars feel so moving to us. They are grand reminders that even brilliance is a temporary state, a fragile flame against an infinite night. At the edge of the Milky Way, this truth sharpens. The disk no longer glows in every direction. It frays, becomes porous. Beyond lies intergalactic dark, a space where gravity is weak, where isolation rules. In such silence, entropy is not only visible in matter, but audible in thought. Could it be that consciousness itself feels thinner here, as though even awareness must obey the law of dissipation? Or is that only our imagination, human hearts, projecting their fragility onto the stars? And still, something in us resists. We record fossils, we carve stone. We send probes outward with messages etched in gold, all as though we could resist this unbinding. Maybe it is not resistance, but ritual, a way of acknowledging entropy by leaving small lights in its vast shadow, a whisper of defiance, a trace of order left behind, even knowing it too will scatter. In the end, entropy is not cruel, it is simply the tide. It asks everything to let go, slowly, softly, until even galaxies forget their names. And standing at the edge, we realize that the loneliness we feel may not be absence at all, but the deepest intimacy, the universe speaking in its quietest voice. And yet, if this much can unravel, if stars themselves dissolve into silence, then what of us, small as we are, brief as we are? What else, hidden deeper than stars, might also be fading even now, forgotten before we ever knew to remember? The idea of a wormhole often begins as a drawing on a page, a curve bent inward, a tunnel between two distant points that would otherwise never touch. And yet, beneath that childlike sketch lies the mathematics of something almost unbearable. In its delicacy, a throat leading from one mouth to another, balanced only by laws that seem to resist their own existence. If we imagine stepping close to such an opening, the first image is not of a machine or a corridor, but of a hollowing, a place where space itself folds into an architecture that is alive, not built from stone or steel, but from the fabric of reality itself. And in that moment, the metaphor of a throat becomes more than language, it becomes structure, with walls that stretch and breathe, with an interior that must be held open against the crushing weight of its own desire to collapse. A wormhole, if it could exist at all, would not sit passively like a doorway waiting to be crossed. It would fight to close, to seal itself, as if the universe were uncomfortable with such shortcuts, as if the cosmos itself preferred patience and distance. To imagine building one is to imagine negotiating with the universe, convincing it to leave a hollow space intact, threading negative energy through the throat to keep it from tightening shut. This negative energy is not a substance we can bottle or pour. It is more like a balance sheet of reality tilted in reverse, a subtraction where there should be addition, a pushing apart where everything longs to fall together. Physicists call it exotic matter, though the word exotic sounds too casual for something so alien, something that feels less like matter and more like a permission slip written in the margins of space-time. Without it, the bridge between mouths crumples into nothingness, vanishing faster than any traveler could pass through. With it, the wormhole might linger, not stable like a cathedral carved in stone, but trembling like a lung held open by fragile threads of breath. And here we find ourselves speaking of architecture, though not the kind measured in bricks and arches, but the kind measured in curvature, geodesics, and the silent symmetries of Einstein's equations. What kind of monument would this be? A wormhole engineered not as a thought experiment, but as a place one might approach. It would be no tower, no pyramid, no monument in the old sense of permanence. It would be instead a breathing passage, the greatest of all corridors, invisible until you are inside it, stretching not through land or ocean, but through the deep fabric of time and space itself. Humanity's greatest architecture might then be something that looks like absence, a hollow, a darkened tunnel leading somewhere beyond sight. And yet absence can also be structure. Silence can also be designed. In this silence, we might walk not on stones, but on the stretched skin of spacetime, and the question would not be how tall it stands, but how long it holds. Perhaps it would flicker with instability, vanishing in moments, leaving only echoes. Perhaps it would need to be constantly fed with negative energy, a monument that requires tending, like a candle flame that dies without fuel. In this sense, it would be less like a finished building and more like a garden, cultivated, sustained, dependent upon balance. And yet, what monument has ever truly been permanent? Pyramids crumble, mountains erode, stars themselves burn to ash. Perhaps the fragility of a wormhole would not be its weakness, but its honesty, its confession that nothing lasts forever, not even the corridors of the cosmos. If such a wormhole could be built, we would enter into questions not only of physics, but of memory. What is a monument for, if not remembrance? But what does a wormhole remember? Does it not erase distance rather than preserve it? Does it not undo separation rather than honor it? It is strange to think that humanity's most lasting structure might be one that forgets space, that folds away the very fabric that usually insists upon patience and journey. Could this forgetting be its own kind of memory, not of places, but of possibility? Could the architecture of wormholes be less about where they take us and more about what they whisper, that the universe is not sealed, that reality itself has hidden corridors waiting to be unveiled? Perhaps the greatest monument we could ever build is one that no photograph could capture, because to look at it would be to see only the mouth of darkness, a ring, a halo, where nothing appears to stand, and yet, behind it, a passage infinite. It would not cast shadows on the ground, but it might cast shadows on our understanding, forcing us to rethink what travel means, what home means, what distance means. It would not tower above us. It would open beneath us, beside us, within reach, yet never fully within comprehension. And like any architecture, it would not merely exist, it would change us. To step through such a corridor would be to rewrite the relationship between presence and absence, between here and there, between now and then. And yet, what if even the act of imagining such an architecture is already the monument? What if the equations scribbled by physicists, the dreams of science fiction, the sketches in the margins of notebooks, what if all of these are themselves the wormholes openings, in thought rather than in space? Perhaps we do not need to step through one to feel their gravity. Perhaps the wonder itself is enough, the whisper that maybe shortcuts exist. Maybe bridges can be hidden in silence. Maybe the universe is not as strict as it seems. If the architecture of wormholes could ever rise from idea to reality, it would not be humanity building against the universe, but with it, persuading spacetime to hold open a fragile lung for just a little longer. And in that persuasion, in that cooperation with the invisible, we might find a new form of art and art, not of permanence, but of possibility, not of stone, but of silence. And if such a monument could be built, perhaps its greatest offering would not be the travel it allowed, but the humility it demanded, the reminder that we live in a cosmos vast enough to bend, vast enough to open, vast enough to dream. And yet, if this much could be imagined, what else might reality be hiding, waiting for us to notice? What if we are not the first? What if the marks we leave behind are not unique, but only echoes of something that has happened before? written in stone and ocean, in the slow breathing of countenance shifting against one another. Fossils are what we know, pressed outlines of shells, spirals of ammonites, the bones of creatures that walked in shadows long before we had words. But there is another kind of fossil that scientists have begun to imagine. The technofossil, the trace not of bone or leaf but of machines, of industry, of a species that knew how to transform its world in ways that could outlast itself. We look at our own cities and wonder, concrete, glass, plastics, alloys, isotopes, born from nuclear fire, what will become of them when we are gone? Is unsettling, not because it is frightening, but because it stretches the imagination into deep time, where civilizations could bloom and vanish like flowers opening in the dark. Could it be that Earth has already hosted such a flowering one we no longer see because the evidence has been buried, eroded, subducted back into the mantle, recycled into molten stone? Geologists speak of entropy and erosion, of how even mountains crumble, how oceans swallow coastlines, how tectonic plates consume the seafloor in cycles of destruction and rebirth. Be dust, erased by rain, by wind, by the quiet chewing of chemistry. And yet, some things last longer. Synthetic molecules that nature never knew how to make. Unusual isotope ratios lingering in rocks. Carbon signatures that whisper of combustion on a planetary scale. If an older civilization once stood where we stand, might it not have left similar signs, strange chemical shadows, imprinted in sediments, artifacts pressed into layers we have not yet drilled? The idea is not new. It is sometimes called the Silurian hypothesis, a question raised not to claim that others lived here before us, but to explore what traces intelligence leaves behind. Landscapes, would we be able to tell, or would deep time erase them as it erases seas and mountains? Perhaps the only fossils left would not be bones, but materials resistant to decay. Technofossils, beyond biology, shimmering fragments of something once made with purpose. And what if such traces are not confined to Earth alone? Out there, beyond our atmosphere, lie wormholes of speculation, corridors in physics that might be real or only imagined, gateways that could connect places as distant as galaxies or as close as the breath of two atoms colliding. If other civilizations reached them, traveled through them, expanded beyond their cradle, might they not have scattered evidence like seashells along a shore, relics of journeys older than memory? Could dust in interstellar space hold particles of craft that dissolved long ago? Could the faint warmth of an unnatural isotope betray a machine that no longer moves? We drift through these questions like through a dream, not because we are certain, but because uncertainty has its own kind of beauty. The rocks beneath our feet whisper of lost oceans and vanished forests. The air we breathe still carries molecules exhaled by ancient lungs. And yet the silence is vast. If others were here, why can we not hear them? Maybe silence is the final fossil, the most enduring artifact of all. Of basalt, cooled from fire, touching the surface of stone that is older than any city. Imagine that within its crystalline lattice there lies a fragment, not natural, not shaped by water or pressure, but by intention, by hands or appendages. We will never know. What would that mean? Would it tell us that intelligence blooms wherever conditions allow, Or would it remind us that even intelligence is mortal? Drilling of cores, in the quiet reading of isotope trails that drift like signatures across the ages. Perhaps one day we will find something out of place, a shard that does not belong, a resonance that should not be there. Perhaps not. The question lingers, like the hush between heartbeats. What if we are not the first? What if our story is not original, but a repetition, a verse sung before, in another voice, in another age? Our ambitions, and if this much can be forgotten, this much can be buried, then what else might lie hidden just beyond our reach, waiting, patient, silent, like the next chapter of the story? The identity of a species in transient humanity were to leave its galaxy, to drift beyond the spirals of the Milky Way into the dark ocean between stars. Would it remain the same, or would the very act of departure dissolve the boundaries of what we call human? For every journey alters more than the body. It alters memory, perception, and even the secret grammar of identity. We like to imagine ourselves as a fixed story, a chapter with clear beginnings and endings, but biology and culture whisper a different truth. Every cell is replaced. Every generation carries mutations that tilt us slightly away from the past, and even our languages shift beneath our feet, erasing words our ancestors once thought eternal. If this is true on Earth, then what happens when the distances stretch not across centuries, but across the gulfs between galaxies? The act of leaving is never neutral. A seed that drifts on the wind does not return unchanged. It lands in soil that forces it to grow differently, to twist roots in unfamiliar minerals, to open leaves in stranger air. And so too with us. To leave the Milky Way would not simply be a question of where we are, but of who we become in the leaving. Would our bones remember Earth's gravity after 1,000 years in lower pull? Would our voices keep their shape in thinner atmospheres, in sealed domes where echoes die against steel? Would memory itself fracture, generation after generation, until Earth becomes less a place and more a dream only half believed? Perhaps species is less a matter of biology and more a matter of story. If we share the same myths, if we carry the same names, if we trace our lineage back to that fragile blue world, then maybe we remain human, even when the shape of our bodies begins to bend. But if stories scatter like ash in the winds of time, if memory decays as surely as carbon isotopes and fossils in crumbling strata, then perhaps humanity is only human so long as we recall what that word once meant. And what if we forget? What if survival, in its silence and repetition, erases the very thread that ties us to who we were? Identity is not only memory, it is also recognition. We see ourselves in each other's faces, in familiar eyes and hands, in the shapes of children who look like parents, yet distance, entropy, and time have ways of softening these resemblances. In deep space, with radiation etching its quiet scars into DNA, with generations adapting to thinner air and recycled light, the mirror may no longer return the same reflection. Perhaps they will look back at us across thousands of light years and wonder whether we were the same species at all or something ancestral, like the fossils buried in stone, evidence of a form that once was but is no longer. Still, maybe identity resists such decay. Maybe humanity is not in the body, but in the reaching, not in the shape of our skulls or the resonance of our speech, but in the way we dream. A creature that longs, that builds, that names its own silence perhaps. That is the essence of being human, and perhaps that essence can survive even when the skin and bone transform into something other. If that is true, then the galaxies we cross are only stages of a longer journey. And humanity is not a species but a verb, a process of becoming, never finished, always in transit. And yet there lingers the haunting question: if every migration reshapes, and every reshaping forgets, does survival beyond the Milky Way unite us as one scattered people, or fracture us into many? Would the colonies that bloom in distant voids recognize each other as kin, or would they speak so differently, move so differently, dream so differently, that reunion would feel like meeting strangers? Perhaps both outcomes are true. Perhaps to be human is to be endlessly divisible, endlessly multiplied, endlessly searching for the thread that ties all selves together in the end. Identity may not be something we carry intact across space, but something we continually weave in the silence between stars. A fragile story, whispered again and again, so that forgetting does not win. And yet, if this much can change in the space of one migration, if this much can blur between memory and forgetting, what happens when we travel still farther, when the galaxies themselves become only shadows behind us? Time has always been imagined as a river flowing forward, carving valleys of memory, pulling us further from what once was and carrying us toward what has not yet come. But some physicists whisper that this river is not as simple as it seems. Perhaps it is not a straight course, but a meandering system of tributaries, splitting and folding back on itself, forming eddies and spirals that do not obey the clean arrow we thought we understood. Wormholes, those mysterious tunnels predicted by Einstein's equations, hint at shortcuts through space, but they also raise unsettling possibilities about time. They invite paradox, the thought that you could walk into a doorway and emerge not only elsewhere, but elsewhere. If the universe truly permits these passages, then time itself may not be a single thread, but a fragile loop, easily bent, easily broken, closed. Time-like curves are the term physicists use, clinical and almost cold, yet the meaning is anything but. They describe paths through space-time that circle back upon themselves, a traveler tracing a line and returning to the very point in time where they began. It sounds abstract, mathematical, but hidden inside that quiet phrase is the suggestion that a person could meet their own past, could stand in the same room as their younger self, could whisper into their own beginning. It suggests that history is not sealed but porous, that cause and effect may trade places, that the seed and the fruit could become entangled in an endless embrace. And when we imagine this too long, the comfort of linear time begins to dissolve, replaced by a vertigo that has no anchor. Paradox blooms here, not like fire but like fog. If you step through a wormhole and encounter your younger self, what choices remain your own? If you prevent an action, does the loop collapse, or does another branch unfold, splitting reality into fragile copies of itself? Could there be universes endlessly multiplying because of decisions that could never resolve? Maybe, maybe not. Some physicists argue that the universe defends itself, that paradoxes cannot be realized, that probabilities bend to protect consistency. But others wonder if the fabric of reality is less strict, more permissive, if time is not law but possibility. And so we arrive at a strange place one, where the future casts a shadow into the present. Imagine making a choice, not because you want to, not because you must, but because you already have. To survive in such a universe would mean surrendering the illusion of independence. It would mean learning to live with echoes, with repetitions, with the ghost of decisions that feel both brand new and infinitely old. In this way, wormholes are not merely pathways through the stars. They are mirrors, showing us that survival might not be a straight journey forward, but a circle endlessly retraced. The mathematics of relativity makes this conceivable. Under immense gravitational warping, under the collapse of stars or the spinning of cosmic strings, space-time can twist itself so tightly that returning to the past is not ruled out. The equations do not forbid it, but mathematics is one thing, and existence is another. What would memory mean if the future could already seep into it? What would death mean if the past never fully lets go of us? Would we be living, or would we be endlessly replayed, like patterns etched into the grooves of space-time, scratched into the record of eternity? And still the question of survival returns. If leaving the galaxy, venturing into the deepest corridors of the cosmos, means stepping into such fragile loops, then what becomes of us? Perhaps survival is not endurance, but repetition. The thought is as quiet as it is unsettling: to walk forever. Entropy demands change, demands that time move forward with an increase in disorder. But what happens if disorder itself becomes cyclical? Could there be universes where entropy resets, where collapse and rebirth are folded into the same eternal moment? Could the arrow of time bend back upon itself and still carry us somewhere we have not yet seen? We cannot know. We can only wonder whether our universe is one of strict endings or fragile repetitions, whether the cosmos itself is a story that must finish or a poem that circles, endlessly recited. The very atoms of our bodies bear the mark of deep time. Isotopes carry records of stellar deaths, billions of years past, memories locked in ratios of decay, silent evidence of ages before our kind drew breath. If time loops are possible, then perhaps these isotopes are not only records, but echoes. Not just a memory of the past, but also a whisper from the future, folded back through time's corridors. And what of us, the observers? We measure, we theorize, we imagine, but we cannot yet step through. Still, we dream of it. We picture walking into the mouth of a wormhole and feeling the universe bend. We picture the strange silence on the other side, the possibility that the footsteps behind us might belong to ourselves, slightly younger, slightly older, slightly displaced in time. And we wonder what survival means in such a place. Repeating, if wormholes are real, then perhaps time is not a boundary, but an invitation. Perhaps every moment we live is already intertwined with another version of itself, looping back, looping forward, fragile but unbroken. The stars above us may be not only distant in space, but also in time, shining from what was and what may still be. And if this much is possible, even the arrow of time can bend into fragile circles, then we are left with a deeper, quieter question. If time itself can fold, what else might we one day find waiting in its loops? Imagine drifting into a place where even the stars refuse to shine, where there is no Milky Way brushing its pale arc across the heavens. No constellations to draw meaning from. no familiar map of light to anchor thought, only the faint drizzle of photons, ghostly travelers set free billions of years ago, still moving endlessly across the dark, slipping quietly between galaxies. In such an emptiness, silence becomes not just the absence of sound, but the very texture of reality itself, pressing against the mind like a weight too subtle to name. We often think of silence as a pause, a temporary retreat between sounds, but in the cosmic dark, it is not a pause. It is permanent, a silence without promise, without the comfort of a returning voice. The human mind is not designed for such stillness, and yet we wonder what if it were forced to adapt. Would thought become sharper, condensed like minerals, under pressure, or would it dissolve, losing structure as memory does when left untended? Psychologists know that sensory deprivation alters perception, bending the boundaries of what we call self. In darkness, the brain begins to invent light, conjuring phantom flashes, strange geometries, glowing figures that are not real. In silence, the nervous system grows restless, straining to catch a rhythm that never comes. Some report hearing their own blood, a hidden pulse echoing in the skull, the subtle crackle of synapses like distant radio static. Could it be that in a world without stars, we would begin to hallucinate new ones, projecting constellations onto the black canvas, simply to soothe the need for pattern? And yet silence is not only deprivation, it is also a mirror. When there is nothing to distract us, the mind turns inward, listening for echoes in the cavern of memory. Perhaps in the endless dark, every thought would stretch out, elongated like sound in a tunnel, taking minutes or hours to dissolve. Perhaps time itself would slow, because there would be nothing external to mark its passing. Without sunrise or sunset, without the shifting shadows of the moon, would we lose the very sense of hours, days, years, or would we invent our own clocks, keeping time by the rhythm of our own breath, by the decay of our own cells? The silence of intergalactic space is not entirely mute, though. Physics tells us that the universe hums with background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang stretched thin by expansion. It is not something the ears could hear, but the instruments can, a whisper left over from creation itself. If humans lived at the edge of nothingness, perhaps that faint hiss would become their music, their proof that even emptiness carries memory, that even the dark is not truly void, and maybe silence would teach us humility. We are used to filling quiet with words, with explanations, with the comfort of voices to hold back the vastness. But if all of that were stripped away, if there were only the drizzle of photons and the soft background murmur of a universe cooling into entropy, perhaps the human mind would grow gentler, slower, less certain of its own importance. Not because silence destroys us, but because it softens us, like stone worn down by centuries of rain. Still, silence is not easy to bear. In monasteries, monks sometimes speak of a silence so profound it becomes a presence, a companion that is both comforting and unsettling. Could it be that in the galactic dark, silence would become a kind of deity, something to revere, something to fear, something that shapes the very core of identity? And if so, would humans cling to it, or would they fight it, desperate to invent noise, to echo their own voices against infinity just to prove they were still there? Perhaps that is why we build machines that hum, lights that flicker, signals that travel across the voids so that we are not left alone with the silence of the cosmos. And yet, the thought lingers, if we were to surrender, to truly enter that weightless hush, would we discover something hidden, some truth that only exists when all else is taken away? And if silence itself can reshape thought, bending the mind to its gravity, then what of forgetting? What of loss? What of all the histories that have slipped from memory into nothingness? If even sound and light can disappear into the void, then what of us? What of the things we have tried so hard to preserve? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? The galaxies drift across the dark sea of the universe, like colossal lanterns, each carrying within it a million sparks of light. And yet, some scientists and poets alike have dared to wonder whether these immense swirls of matter might not be only structures, but something closer to life itself. Galaxies grow, they change, they consume, they release, they even seem to die. They are not alive in the way we are alive, not with breath and heartbeat, not with hunger and memory. And yet their arcs of motion resemble something strangely organic, something that hints at a vast scale of being we cannot quite grasp. When we look at the Milky Way above us, folding across the sky in a pale ribbon, are we not looking at a body in motion, a body that might be aging, dreaming, or stretching slowly in the fabric of time? Some researchers have compared galaxies, two ecosystems, self-regulating, self-nourishing, devouring dust and gas, and scattering new generations of stars in return. Like forests, they grow denser and more tangled, only too thin again when storms of supernova sweep through, shaking loose their old bones. And just as coral reefs build themselves from countless fragile forms, galaxies build themselves from the ash of what came before, layering debris upon debris, memory upon memory, until the shape of a whole emerges. The idea may be metaphor, or perhaps it is a kind of truth we cannot yet name, that life does not begin or end at the edges of flesh, but may exist as process, as persistence, as rhythm, even at the grandest of scales. If the Milky Way is such a being, then we are deep inside it, tiny creatures carried within its structure, like cells folded into the tissue of an immense body. We are not separate from it. Our lives, our histories, our struggles, all play out within its slow-breathing arcs, sheltered within its spiraling arms. Perhaps the galaxy has no awareness of us, no more than we are aware of the small bacteria moving across our own skin. Or perhaps awareness itself takes a form we cannot imagine at this scale. Slow, beyond comprehension, measured not in seconds or centuries, but in cycles of 1 billion years. If a galaxy thinks, it thinks in silences longer than the age of mountains, in pulses so vast they seem to us like stillness. And yet the metaphor stretches further. Galaxies consume one another. They collide, they merge, they digest the stars of their neighbors until only one remains, larger, brighter, changed. This is not unlike predation, nor unlike reproduction, nor unlike the eternal turning of ecosystems, where growth requires loss, where one being becomes the nourishment for another. If this is life, it is life without cruelty or kindness, life beyond the dualities we know, a life of pure transformation. What would it mean for us, the brief children of Earth, to realize that our very home is a particle within such a living, consuming organism. The thought carries both awe and unease, because if galaxies live, they also die. They collapse into themselves, running out of the fuel that once sparked their stars, fading into quiet embers against the backdrop of space. The light of each becomes memory, absorbed into the long silence of the cosmos. And perhaps here too the analogy holds. Every organism leaves behind a trace, a shadow, a pattern in the dust that can be read by those who come after. Could it be that galaxies to leave fossils, not of bone, but of radiation, not of teeth, but of trails of light that whisper their stories to those who learn to listen? It is a strange humility to think of ourselves this way, not as separate from the Milky Way, but as passengers within it, particles carried along in its bloodstream of light. When we gaze upward on clear nights, perhaps we are not simply looking out into the universe, but looking out from inside a living body, peering through its skin of stars into the greater dark. What then does it mean to imagine leaving this body, crossing into another? Would it be like stepping beyond the boundary of a home, or would it be more like a cell severing itself from an organ, losing the context that gave it shape? Could we ever belong to another galaxy, or are we bound here, grown into this body's slow dance, inseparable from its being? And maybe the most haunting thought is this: if galaxies are alive, then the universe itself is a community of beings, drifting and merging, conversing in collisions and in light. A cosmic ecology without language, yet full of expression, where every star, every cloud of dust, every flicker of radiation is part of an endless dialogue of existence. We are listening to that dialogue when we point our telescopes to the night sky. We are not outside observers. We are inside voices, echoes of the same vast song. And yet, if the Milky Way itself can be thought of as alive, if its vast arms and hidden heart can be imagined as something more than matter, then we are left with a final question. If this much can be alive, then what else, what even larger presence, might be waiting, silent, breathing beyond the galaxies themselves? The mathematics of homecoming. Once you leave a galaxy, can you ever return? The question at first seems simple, almost like a child's curiosity asked beneath the stars. But in truth, it is tangled with laws of gravity, with the fabric of spacetime, with numbers so large they fall apart when we try to hold them in the mind. For every star that shines above us, there is an orbit, a momentum, a drift, and all of them are moving together in currents that we can scarcely perceive. Home is not a fixed point. It is not an island in the dark. It is a trajectory, a moving body inside an ocean of other moving bodies, and the mathematics of coming back is not as certain as we would wish. Imagine a ship leaving the spiral arms of the Milky Way, engines carrying it across intergalactic space. The passengers may look behind them at the faint swirl of stars and think that one day they might turn around, retrace their steps, and go home. But space is not a frozen map. The galaxy itself rotates, the stars drift, entire regions dissolve and reform like slow currents in a vast and silent sea. By the time one traveler has crossed even a small fraction of that distance, the place they once called home is no longer in the place where they left it. The coordinates are not stable. The memory of home becomes more precise than the reality. And then there is time to move quickly enough to cross these gulfs one must bend to relativity. Time slows for the traveler, but not for the galaxy left behind. 1,000 years may pass inside a ship, while millions unfold in the world that was abandoned. Oceans rise and dry, mountains grind themselves down, continents slip beneath seas. A civilization might wither to dust, might turn to myth, might even leave no trace at all. So when the voyager turns their gaze back, calculating the way home, with impeccable mathematics, what they return to may not resemble home at all. The equations of orbital mechanics can tell us where a planet will be, how a star might arc through the halo of its galaxy, how a cluster drifts inside a greater cluster. But no mathematics can bind memory to matter. You can chart a return path, yes, but not to the same place in time, not to the same version of the world you left. Home is not a fixed coordinate in the cosmos, but a moment fragile, fleeting, and unrecoverable once it has passed. Perhaps this is why we carry memory like a secret map. Inside the mind, home never moves. The galaxy does not rotate. The planet does not change its orbit. The faces of those we love do not wither. Inside the soft gravity of recollection, there is a still point where nothing drifts away. And yet, the body, bound by physics, cannot inhabit memory. It must drift forward, always forward, along the rivers of space and time, unable to fold back into what was. Could it be that all of existence is shaped by this impossibility of return? The arrow of entropy always pointing away from the beginning. The spiral of galaxies always unwinding into deeper space. The slow erosion of history always removing more than it preserves. We think of home as something we can hold on to, something to which we can return when the journey ends. But perhaps it is only ever the place from which the journey began. Even here on Earth, the mathematics whispers the same truth. The planet wobbles on its axis, drifts through its orbit, slowly reshapes its face with ice and fire. The continent that holds our childhood homes is not in the same position it once was. The ocean tides pull at the rotation, lengthening the days, changing the rhythm of time itself. If we leave for long enough, even if we only leave in memory, can we ever return to what was? Or is home already gone the moment we step away? Maybe this is why the night sky feels both comforting and unbearably sad. The constellations appear eternal, but they are not. Each star is wandering, each constellation already unraveling. Though the unraveling is so slow, our lives cannot feel it. To leave is only to magnify what was already true, that everything moves, everything drifts, everything changes. To return is always to return to something slightly altered, slightly displaced, never quite what it was. Not because the mathematics is cruel, but because the mathematics is honest. It tells us that nothing in the universe holds still. It tells us that home is real only in memory, and memory itself is fragile. Perhaps this is why, even when we travel no further than the edge of our own town, there can be moments when the air feels strange, when the streets feel unfamiliar, when we sense that we cannot step back into the exact life we left behind. And yet maybe this too is part of the gift. If home could be perfectly preserved, perfectly fixed, perfectly waiting for us, then perhaps we would never venture outward at all. We move because we cannot go back. We journey because home itself is always moving, pulling us into the future, whether we are ready or not. And so the mathematics of homecoming is not a formula of coordinates and velocities, not truly. It is the quiet recognition that the return we dream of does not exist, except in the chambers of memory, except in the fragile architecture of the heart. We are always in motion, always arriving, always leaving. The idea of home is what steadies us in the motion, even as the place itself dissolves. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? They call it space-time, as though time and space were two threads knotted together in a fabric we cannot touch, only imagine. And sometimes, as that fabric folds and trembles, physicists wonder if it might contain hidden seams, places where one fold brushes against another, where two moments that should be infinitely apart whisper as if they were neighbors. We call these seams wormholes, and though no human hand has seen one, the mathematics makes their shadow unavoidable. Like footprints pressed into soil we can't quite reach. At their simplest, wormholes are shortcuts, a tunnel between 2 points, collapsing the long distance between stars into a single, impossible step. But in truth, they are not about distance alone. They are about longing, the longing of the mind to escape the chains of linear time, the longing of the heart to know what lies beyond reach, the longing of humanity to believe that no distance, no separation is ever final. We invent equations not only to measure, but to comfort ourselves against the vastness. Maybe there is a way through. Maybe the silence is not as absolute as it feels. Quantum foam, the restless fabric of existence at the smallest possible scale, is not quiet. It seethes, it flickers, it pops in and out of being like waves fizzing into air. There, space-time is not smooth but bubbling, stitched with possibilities that flare for the briefest instant before dissolving again. Some physicists imagine that within this foam, wormholes are born and die endlessly, so tiny, so fragile, they collapse before they can be crossed. And yet, if they appear at all, even for a breath, it means the universe allows them. And if the universe allows them, could there be a way to coax them larger, to hold them open, to let us slip inside? The equations suggest it would take negative energy, exotic matter, with properties unlike anything we know, to keep a wormhole from collapsing. Such matter has never been seen, but the mathematics invites it like an unanswered question. Could the universe be hiding resources we cannot yet imagine? Could there be a symmetry we have overlooked, a secret architecture of energy woven into the silence? Or is the very idea a reflection of our own hunger, our own dream of escape from the prison of distance and time? Even without traveling through them, wormholes haunt our imagination because they embody something almost spiritual. They are not only doorways in physics, but metaphors of connection, symbols of how everything might be linked beneath the surface. When we think of someone far away and feel them close in memory, is that not a kind of wormhole, a fold in the fabric of human experience? When ancient fossils echo the lives of creatures long gone, is that not another passage, bridging one epoch to another, making what is lost feel suddenly alive again? Some suggest the universe itself might be holographic, every surface containing the information of the whole, every part whispering the story of every other. If that is true, Wormholes might not be tunnels, but mirrors, shortcuts, not only in distance, but in meaning. Could it be that every place already contains its opposite, every moment folded into all others, so that the separation we feel is only the illusion of perspective? Maybe the truth is not that wormholes wait to be found, but that they are everywhere, written invisibly between particles, memories, thoughts, even dreams. Imagine standing on a shoreline at night, the stars mirrored in the dark water, sky and sea indistinguishable. The horizon becomes a seam where two infinities touch. That horizon is like a wormhole, a reminder that boundaries are never as solid as they seem, that the universe always doubles back on itself, creating strange symmetries. We do not need to cross one to feel their presence. The very possibility that they could exist changes the way we see distance, the way we see separation, in the slow drift of galaxies, in the entropy of time. Wormholes remind us that the laws of physics still leave cracks for imagination, still leave places where science sounds almost like myth. And perhaps this is the soul of physics, not just to measure, but to invite wonder, to acknowledge the vast unknowns, to honor the questions that will not close. Wormholes sit in that delicate space between certainty and dream, between calculation and poetry. They may never be proven, but their absence would leave the universe colder, emptier, less human. So we circle back to the simplest thought: if space can bend, why not bend so far it meets itself again? If time can flow, why not flow in more than one direction, weaving rivers we cannot yet follow? And if the universe is indeed stitched with such hidden doors, then what does it mean for us, fragile beings who spend our lives moving in straight lines from birth to death, never able to turn back? Are wormholes promises, or just mirrors of our yearning? Not because we need them to be real, but because we need them to exist as ideas, reminders that even the most rigid of laws may conceal a hidden grace, that the story of the cosmos is not finished, that somewhere beyond the visible horizon, the fabric. And yet, if this much can be imagined, if physics can breathe such wonder into being, then what else lies hidden in the silence of the universe, waiting for us to listen? The universe remembers in whispers, not in words. And one of its most ancient whispers is the faint, ghost-like glow that fills all of space. Astronomers call it the cosmic microwave background, the thin afterglow of the Big Bang stretched across billions of years until it has cooled into a soft static. The same static you sometimes glimpse on an old television tuned to nothing at all. This glow is everywhere, behind the stars, beneath the galaxies, woven through the silence of space like an invisible quilt of memory. It is the oldest light we can see, older than any star, older than any planet, older than any dream of life. And within its delicate patterns, there may be echoes, faint ripples, subtle scars, traces of something that has passed through before. If galaxies are oceans and stars are waves, then the cosmic microwave background is the tide that never recedes, holding the imprint of every motion since time began. Scientists map it with exquisite care, tracing the small fluctuations that mark where matter first began to gather, where gravity first sculpted seeds of galaxies. These fluctuations look like smudges on a canvas, random at first glance, yet ordered in their chaos. They tell us about density, about temperature, about the infancy of everything we know. But one wonders, if we crossed the galaxies ourselves, if our machines one day moved across the void in numbers large enough to stir the dark, could even that leave a trace? Could we, in some deep cosmic sense, disturb the background hum? The light of the microwave background is fragile, stretched thin by time. A photon released 13.5 billion years ago has traveled all this way without pause, only to brush against our detectors, still carrying the fingerprint of its birth. If such ancient messengers can endure, perhaps they carry more than just the story of primordial fire. Perhaps they carry faint interruptions, as though existence itself has been scrawled upon, erased, and written over again. Could it be that every great movement leaves a vibration too delicate for us to notice now, but strong enough to whisper across eternity? When we look at the cosmic microwave background, we are not only gazing into the beginning, we are also looking at a mirror of permanence. It is like standing in a cave and hearing an echo so ancient that the original voice has long since vanished. The sound remains without the singer, and yet, what if there were other voices hidden inside it? Not because we expect them to be there, but because silence rarely remains untouched forever. Some physicists have asked daring questions. If there were other universes brushing against ours, their collision could have left a bruise in the microwave background. If civilizations unimaginably old once stretched their power to galactic scales, their work might have shifted the radiation ever so slightly. These ideas remain speculative, resting more in philosophy than in hard equations. But speculation itself is part of the wonder, because when you stare at a map of the cosmic background, colored blotches representing tiny temperature differences, you cannot help but wonder if the randomness hides intention. Could it be that some of those ripples are not only the signature of physics, but also of presence? Imagine, just for a moment, that humanity grows beyond the Earth, beyond the solar system, beyond the Milky Way. Imagine we scatter like pollen across the dark machines, carrying us farther and farther, engines glowing like sparks against infinite night. Over tens of millions of years, could the sheer pattern of our movement mark the sky itself? Would we, unintentionally, write our name into the quietest fabric of the universe? Not in monuments, not in cities, not in artifacts, but in the tiniest distortions of light that has been traveling since time began. A fingerprint pressed against the afterglow of creation. The thought carries humility. For if such traces are possible, they are also unavoidable. Every action, every presence, every heartbeat in the cosmos leaves something behind. Entropy ensures that nothing is ever perfectly erased, only transformed. The heat of a candle lingers in the air. The weight of a stone lingers in the soil. The passage of a person lingers in the memory of those who remain. And if all these small human echoes endure, why not cosmic ones as well? Perhaps the universe itself is a memory too vast to comprehend, with the microwave background as its oldest page. We might ask then, are we reading the universe, or is the universe reading us? When scientists place satellites in orbit to measure the faint radiation, smoothing out the interference of Earth's atmosphere, they are, in some sense, eavesdropping on the very first dawn. But maybe, just maybe, the act of listening itself adds to the song. maybe the very attention we give the cosmos folds us into the story we are trying to decipher. Not because the data requires us, but because the act of wonder cannot be separated from the thing wondered about as you drift in thought. Imagine lying beneath that vast glow, invisible to the eye, but always there, surrounding you. Imagine that every breath, every thought, every moment of your life is taking place beneath this universal afterglow, as though you are forever bathed in the light of beginnings. The microwave background is not distant, it is here, it is now, it is all around, pressing softly against your skin like the weight of time itself. And if we are already inside it, then perhaps our story is already written into it too. Not loudly, not dramatically, but softly, like a brushstroke in a painting so large no one will ever see the whole. And yet, if we might someday leave echoes in the oldest light of all, what else might linger in places we have not yet thought to search? We picture the void between galaxies as a desert of unthinkable scale, where even light is rare, and the distances are so vast that human imagination falters at the threshold. It is a space where there are no landmarks, no horizons, no sense of up or down, only the faint whispers of radiation left over from the birth of everything. To think of it as a desert is almost comforting, because deserts on Earth, though harsh, still hold wind and sand, stone and heat, some trace of movement, some echo of life. But in the intergalactic desert, even those comforts vanish. What remains is absence. And yet, we find ourselves reaching for metaphors of survival, for stories of endurance, because it is the only way we can carry ourselves into such an emptiness. A desert on Earth strips the body down, tests its limits, forces stillness, humility, and silence. Perhaps the intergalactic desert would do the same, not to our bodies, which could never survive it, but to our minds. Imagine drifting there, far beyond the pull of any sun, with no path back and no path forward, surrounded by nothing but the faint glow of distant galaxies, each so far away that it feels less like a destination and more like a memory. You might measure time not in days or years, but in the slow red shifting of starlight, the stretching of photons as the universe itself breathes outward. What would survival mean here, if not simply the persistence of thought, the stubbornness of wonder? Science tells us that between galaxies, the density of matter is astonishingly low, so low that on average there might be only one atom in every cubic meter. An emptiness that is not empty, but still thinner than anything we have words for. It means that if you held out your hand in some impossible act, you would be reaching into a sea where the molecules of existence are stretched almost to breaking. And yet, even here, there are filament wisps of hydrogen and helium, ancient remnants of the Big Bang threads that weave galaxies together, like invisible roots beneath an endless desert floor. Could it be that even the loneliest parts of the universe still carry the memory of connection? We survive deserts on Earth by remembering the smallest traces of life, a well hidden under stone, a plant blooming after rain, a bird crossing the horizon. Could the same be true of the intergalactic desert? Perhaps survival there would mean learning to read the faintest signs, the background radiation humming softly in every direction, the gravitational pull of structures so large we cannot see them, only feel their tug. These would be our oases, our constellations of hope. Not because they promise comfort, but because they remind us that even in emptiness there is pattern, and in pattern there is meaning. When the mind walks into silence, it creates stories to keep itself company. Travelers in earthly deserts once told tales to explain the mirages, shapes wavering on horizons that never drew closer. Would we do the same in the cosmic desert? Would we imagine voices in the static of background radiation, faces in the scattered, photons' purpose in the stretching void? Maybe it is less about survival of the body and more about survival of memory. What would it mean to cross such emptiness? Without stories, how would we even know we had been there? Some scientists speculate that the intergalactic medium, though thin, may hold more mass in total than all the stars combined, spread so finely we can barely measure it. That what appears empty might in fact be overflowing, only hidden from our eyes. If this is true, then perhaps deserts are never as barren as they seem. Perhaps survival is not about filling the void, but learning to listen to what is already there. Maybe the intergalactic desert is not empty at all, but simply quiet, so quiet that our minds mistake it for silence. And what of time in a desert? Time slows to the rhythm of the sun, the drift of sand, the endless horizon that never changes. In the intergalactic desert, time itself might dissolve, stretched by the expansion of space until seconds and centuries blur. Would we still hold to the idea of beginning and end? Or would survival mean surrendering those boundaries, drifting instead into the deep, unmeasured now? Is it possible that our metaphors of survival are not about enduring the desert at all, but about dissolving into it, becoming part of its endlessness? We call it a desert because we fear emptiness, because we crave the presence of edges, shapes, and landmarks. But what if the desert is not absence, but possibility? What if survival there does not mean holding on, but letting go, letting our stories, our particles, our memories scatter into the fabric of space until we are no longer separate from it? Not because we failed to endure, but because endurance itself means becoming part of something larger, something measureless. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? If stone wears away and oceans grind mountains into sand, if even stars fall silent in the end, then what remains to hold the story of existence? Matter itself is fragile. The rocks fracture, the fossils dissolve, the archives burn, and the bones return to dust, yet memory lingers. Not in the same way we carry a thought across the fragile vessel of the brain, but in subtler forms, woven through the quiet fabric of the universe. If matter erodes and dust scatters, what if memory itself is the real vessel? Consider how a ripple of light once released continues on, stretching outward forever, weakened but never quite erased. A radio wave whispered into the night sky in the last century still travels, still wanders between the stars, still carries the trace of a human voice. What is that if not memory without matter? Information persisting after the hand that made. It has long been stilled. The universe itself seems to archive in ways we can barely imagine, through isotopes trapped in ice, through scars carved into canyon walls, through faint radiation echoing from the first dawn of creation. It is not memory in words or stories, but memory in signatures, in echoes, in quiet residue. When we speak of wormholes and folded space, we often imagine travel of bodies, of ships, of living matter crossing impossible distances. But what if the truer travelers are not bodies at all, but memory itself? Could it be that we are already sending ourselves through wormholes? Not by stepping inside them, but by releasing light, releasing information, releasing whispers of who we are into the dark. Perhaps the self is not meant to move as matter moves, but as memory moves dispersed, weightless, untethered from decay. What would it mean to be remembered, not by stone statues or written books, but by photons carrying our pattern across the endless black? What if identity itself could be stored not in the wet tissue of neurons, but in a web of quantum echoes, delicate yet enduring? Some scientists speculate that quantum entanglement itself may hold traces of information across space and time, invisible threads binding events that have long since passed. Could a thought, once thought, leave an imprint deeper than its synapse? Could the very act of perception ripple into the fabric of reality, leaving behind something more enduring than the body that carried it? We already glimpse the edges of this possibility in our machines. Hard drives, store code, satellites, beam signals, algorithms remember what the flesh forgets. Yet even these are fragile, bound to metals that rust and circuits that fracture. Beyond them, though, exists another kind of archive, cosmic, unchosen, silent. The isotope of a dying leaf can tell us the story of the air it once breathed. The layers of sediment at the bottom of an ocean trench can tell us of climates that came and went before a single human was born. Memory lingers without asking to. Memory accumulates where matter dissolves. And if memory is not bound to flesh, then what of us? Could a person, reduced not to ashes but to information, still cross distances we call impossible? A wormhole bends matter, but information perhaps requires no bending. Perhaps it simply flows. Perhaps when we wonder about immortality, we are asking the wrong question. Not how do we keep the body alive, but how do we keep the memory awake? Not how do we travel with our bones intact, but how do we let the essence scatter and still remain whole? It is strange, almost haunting, to think that every word we speak is already leaving us, radiating outward, carrying our pattern far beyond our grasp, long after our own ears have forgotten the sound, long after the body that made the sound has become soil. The sound still travels. Somewhere, light is still carrying the image of a face long gone through the black. Is it possible that consciousness itself is not erased but dispersed, like smoke, like dust, like light? If so, then the future traveler across wormholes may not be a body stepping through a doorway, but a memory unfolding on the other side. Maybe this is why we dream of eternity, why we write, why we speak, why we leave marks on cave walls and carvings in stone. Not because we wish to be seen now, but because we hope that memory itself might carry us beyond the limits of matter. Maybe wormholes are not doors in space, but doors in remembrance gateways, where memory alone has the power to slip through, light enough to pass where matter collapses. And if that is true, then the quiet hum of the universe may already be a library. Every star, every particle, every fragment of radiation a record. Not a record we can easily read, not yet, but a memory nonetheless. a memory beyond stone, beyond dust, beyond the fragility of matter. And yet, if memory can survive where matter falls away, then we must ask ourselves, whose memories are these, and who will be there to remember them? Could we, one day, learn to read the silent archives written not in books, but in the trembling of photons and the whispers of atoms? Could we find in the ruins of light not only the memory of Earth, but the memory of ourselves? And if this much can be carried without weight, if this much can endure without form, what else might the universe be keeping safe, waiting for us to notice? The death of galaxies is not a sudden thing, not an explosion that announces itself in sound and fury, but rather a long unraveling, a dimming so slow that no single eye could ever notice it. In the beginning, galaxies are vibrant, blue-white, with young stars, rivers of gas winding through their arms, dust shimmering like powder over silk. But as eons pass, the raw material that fuels starbirth begins to thin. The hydrogen clouds, once vast reservoirs of possibility, are steadily consumed by the very fires they once ignited. And so, the lights begin to fade. One by one, the engines shut down. What remains are old stars, redder, dimmer, quieter, the stellar elders of a once luminous city now whispering in twilight. It is not that galaxies die in violence, though collisions can come, but that they drift toward stillness, like a campfire that has burned its wood and is left glowing in embers. When galaxies collide, the spectacle is not a battle, but a slow merging. Their stars rarely touch, separated by oceans of emptiness, but their shapes distort, spiraling into tidal arms that stretch like ghostly ribbons across space. Gravity choreographs a slow ballet, pulling, folding, reshaping. Sometimes the encounter reignites starbirth, compressing the lingering gas into sudden nurseries of light. But even this is temporary, for every act of renewal consumes what little fuel remains. Entropy always waits. And so, even the brief flourish of brightness is but a delay before the quieting returns. Imagine standing outside time, watching billions of years compress into moments, seeing entire galaxies bloom, tangle, flare, and fade like sparks from a fire drifting into the night sky. It is not rage, but inevitability, not death in drama, but in silence. If humanity ever leaves Earth, if we step across the threshold of our small cradle, it may not be only the hunger for exploration that drives us. Perhaps, somewhere deep inside, there lingers an unspoken awareness that the very universe itself is moving toward dimness. We are not only escaping the dangers of our planet or the finite warmth of our sun, but the destiny of all galaxies, the thinning, the cooling, the exhaustion. To leave might be to resist not place but fate, to search for some corner of creation where the embers still burn bright, where the lights have not yet dimmed. But is such a place even possible? Or are we simply moving through the stages of a greater night, one we cannot outrun? The traces of this slow death are already visible. Astronomers measure the star formation rate of the universe and find that it peaked billions of years ago. We live not in the universe's youth, nor in its middle age, but in its long evening. The skies above us may seem brilliant, but compared to what once was, the cosmos is already dimmer, quieter. There was a time when the night sky would have been crowded with light, when galaxies shone fiercer, when the Milky Way itself was alive with more birth than decline. We do not notice the fading, for our human lifespans are too short to register the change, but the instruments we build, the measurements we take, tell us the fire is lowering. The great lights are going out, and yet there is wonder in this. For death is not the end of matter, but its transformation. When galaxies burn through their fuel, when stars consume their hydrogen and helium, they forge heavier elements in their cores: carbon, oxygen, iron, the ingredients of planets, of oceans, of breath. Every fading star has left behind a gift, scattering dust and atoms across space. Entire worlds may arise from these ashes, circling dim stars, or even glowing faintly on their own. The death of galaxies, in this sense, is also the seeding of new stories, stories we may never see. Perhaps, somewhere in that great silence, life will awaken again, unaware of the long lineage of fire that made its existence possible. Still, the direction is clear. With each cycle, less gas remains. With each collision, more stars are locked into quiet orbits around central black holes, falling into shadows from which no light escapes. Over trillions of years, even the black holes themselves will evaporate, releasing their energy in whispers until space itself is cold and diffuse. The galaxies will be gone, or rather, they will be stretched so thin that the very word ceases to mean anything. What does a galaxy become when there are no new stars to hold it together, when the arms are empty, when the lights have faded? Is it still a galaxy, or only a memory? Perhaps we are fortunate, then, to live in this fleeting moment, to see the cosmos while it still has color, while galaxies still spiral with grace, while there is still birth alongside death. Maybe we exist in a twilight hour when both light and shadow share the stage, a rare interlude in an otherwise endless decline. And perhaps, just perhaps, this fleeting glimpse is what allows us to feel wonder at all. If everything had always been light, would we have learned to marvel at it? If everything were already dark, would we have imagined its return? The death of galaxies is not tragedy, but rhythm, a long, slow heartbeat of creation and fading, expansion and silence. And as we look outward, measuring the dimming, we might also look inward, sensing how all things we love are touched by the same truth. The fading of galaxies is not separate from us, it is inside us. It is the same law that guides our lives, our memories, our breath. And if this much can be lost, if entire galaxies can vanish into silence, then what else? What else might we have forgotten? If a wormhole opens to another galaxy, what awaits? A mirror of our own, silence, or perhaps civilizations older than memory. Arrival itself becomes a paradox, the end of the journey, but the birth of new questions. To imagine stepping through such a doorway is to confront both the promise of discovery and the impossibility of completion. For even when we arrive somewhere new, the act of arrival only deepens the mystery of where we are. It is a threshold, never a resting place, because each horizon unveils another horizon behind it. The mind cannot help but wonder what lies beyond the beyond. And even if we reached it, would we ever know that we had finally arrived? The physics of wormholes tells us something curious. They are not simple tunnels carved into emptiness. They are folds in the very geometry of space-time, shortcuts through the deep fabric that binds everything together. General relativity allows for such bridges, though fragile, unstable, and perhaps forever out of reach for us. Still, they live in the mathematics, shimmering like secret doorways, written in the code of reality. If they exist, then stepping into one would not be like walking through a doorway in a room. It would be more like dissolving, like being carried by the bending of the universe itself. You would vanish from one side and appear in another, as if the universe had simply changed its mind about where you belonged. But what is it to belong in a place? If we were to emerge in another galaxy, what would that mean? Would it be a new home, or only a reflection of the old? Perhaps it would feel strangely familiar. The same stars rearranged in new constellations, the same physics whispering in different languages of light. Or perhaps it would be utterly alien, a silence thicker than anything we know, where even atoms form differently, where even the concept of life might not find purchase. Arrival could be recognition, arrival could be estrangement, and perhaps both at once. The paradox begins here. To arrive is to finish a journey, yet it is also to begin one. A traveler who steps through a wormhole does not find an ending. They find another unknown, stretched endlessly outward. The human mind longs for finality, a place to rest, a certainty that the journey has reached its purpose. And yet, the universe seems to refuse such certainty. It offers, instead, an infinite unfolding. Perhaps this is why we dream of wormholes and distant galaxies, not because we believe they will answer us, but because they promise an eternal opening of questions. Arrival, then, is not closure, it is expansion. Imagine standing on the far side of such a crossing. The stars are different. Their light reaches you with signatures that tell of new histories, new fusions, new deaths. Some may be younger than our own, glowing with a brilliance that reminds you of beginnings. Others may be older, heavy with the ashes of collapsed suns. You might find traces of elements not common in our corner of the universe, isotopes decaying in patterns unfamiliar to earthly science, fossils written not in stone but in the very chemistry of alien atmospheres. Every breath would carry the scent of strangeness, and every silence would hum with questions your body could not yet frame. But could it be that arrival is also a kind of forgetting? The moment we set foot on a new shore, the journey behind us becomes a shadow. The wormhole would close, perhaps forever, and the memory of home would begin to erode. We might forget the sound of our oceans, the shape of our constellations, the weight of familiar gravity. Time would do what time always does: blur the edges, soften the echoes, erase without malice. In this way, to arrive somewhere new is to lose part of where we were. The paradox is sharp. Arrival carries within it both discovery and erasure. And what of civilizations older than memory? If such beings exist, waiting on the far side of the wormhole, what would they make of us? Would they greet us as children, fragile and unknowing, carrying questions too small for their age? Or would they remain silent, observing us as one might observe a fleeting ripple on the surface of water? Perhaps they would not recognize us at all, for their concept of recognition may not align with ours. To them, we might not even appear alive. Or perhaps they would see in us something they had once been, long ago, before their own transformations carried them beyond flesh, beyond thought, beyond time. It is tempting to believe that such an arrival would answer something final, that we would stand before them and at last understand what it means to live, to travel, to search. But maybe not. Maybe their presence would deepen the mystery, as every answer they gave would open more questions, as every gesture of welcome would reveal an even vaster distance between their knowing and ours. Maybe the paradox of arrival is that it can never deliver what we most hope it will deliver: certainty, closure, peace. Instead, it gives us more of the same endless curiosity, endless wonder, endless hunger for what lies just beyond arrival. Then becomes less about a place and more about perception. It is the shift from not seeing to seeing, from not knowing to knowing just enough to glimpse the vastness still unknown. To arrive is not to end a journey, but to change its shape. The wormhole does not close the story. It lengthens it, stretching it into new directions. Just as every fossil we find on Earth does not resolve our history but complicates it, so too would arrival in another galaxy only tangle the threads further. It is not the conclusion of a sentence, but the turning of a page. And so the paradox continues. We seek arrival because we crave completion, yet every arrival only multiplies our incompletion. Perhaps this is not a failure, but the very design of existence, to keep us moving, to keep us searching, to keep us humble before the infinite. To arrive is to see more deeply into the endlessness of what cannot be arrived at, to step through. The wormhole is to admit that the journey was never about finishing. It was always about opening, and opening again, and opening still. And yet, if this much can be opened, if every arrival only folds into another unfolding, then what else might be waiting in the endless corridors of the universe? Even if humans fail, the attempt to leave the Milky Way becomes its own technofossile, a fossil not of bone, but of ambition. It would not be buried beneath layers of stone like ammonites sealed in shale, or the ribcages of dinosaurs pressed into desert cliffs. Instead, it would drift in the silent dark, suspended between stars, waiting for no discoverer, and yet existing as a record all the same. A shard of metal tumbling endlessly through interstellar night, a disk etched with sounds of oceans and heartbeats, the slow leakage of radio waves echoing outward, faint but insistent, like whispers fading across an endless canyon. Not the fossil of life, but the fossil of yearning, a trace of the strange creatures who once looked up from a fragile blue world and wondered if they belonged elsewhere. We call them artifacts, spacecraft, probes, but stripped of function and intention, they become something quieter: relics. Voyager, Pioneer, New Horizons, each one launched with a timetable, with goals, with measurements and destinations, and yet each destined for a future where goals and measurements no longer matter. In time, their power fades, their signals stop, their instruments cool, but the body remains. Aluminum, titanium, gold-plated copper, a technological skeleton sealed against decay, drifting further and further from the sun, moving from human purpose into geological silence. What does it mean, then, for a species to leave behind a fossil in the sky? Is it arrogance, or is it humility, to think that one might leave a mark, not only on the Earth, but on the fabric of space itself? On Earth, fossils form when bone becomes stone, when pressure replaces the organic with the mineral. when time reshapes what was fragile into something enduring. But in the vacuum, there is no pressure, no sediment, no burial. The fossil of a dream is preserved not by stone, but by absence, by the absence of air, the absence of decay, the absence of all the forces that wear things down. Out there in the cold, an artifact may last longer than a continent. A continent shifts, breaks, subducts into the mantle, erased within hundreds of millions of years. But a golden record on Voyager may circle in quiet loops for billions. Could it be that our most enduring trace is not the pyramids or the ruins we leave behind on Earth, but the fragile crafts we once flung into the void? Could it be that the real fossils of our species will never be found in rock, but in the emptiness between stars? And yet even these fossils are not forever. Cosmic rays pierce metal, atoms slowly sputter into space. Micrometeorites carve their wounds. Entropy unfolds its patient hand. Nothing escapes erosion, not even dreams. But if erosion is slow enough, if decay is stretched thin across cosmic time, then perhaps the record is still readable, not by us, not by anyone we know, but by the mere possibility of another gaze. Perhaps 1,000,000 years from now, some intelligence, unknown to us, drifting or born in some alien cradle, might brush against the fossil of our ambition and wonder who dared to send it and why. Perhaps they would listen to the crackling voices, the music etched in copper, and hear not only the message, but the silence between words. A fossil is not the creature itself, it is only a shadow, a trace, a reminder that something once was. And so too with the technofossils of our ambition. They are not us, not really, but they are what remains when we are gone. The way a footprint hardens into stone even after the walker has long disappeared. Maybe that is the truth of memory, that it does not preserve the fullness of being, only the outline, and maybe that outline is enough. Enough to suggest that somewhere, once, a fragile species lifted its eyes, felt the pull of the stars, and took a trembling step outward. And if even that step is forgotten, if even those artifacts are swallowed by time, then still the act of sending them carried weight. For the fossil of a dream is not only the object left behind, but the gesture itself, the choice to reach, to stretch, to imagine a beyond. Not because success was guaranteed, not because survival was certain, but because to remain silent would have been a kind of death in itself. In this way, the fossil is not only a remnant of ambition, but a mirror of longing. And yet, if this much can be carried forward in silence, if this much can be pressed into the dark, what other fossils of thought, of memory, of wonder, might also wait to be uncovered? Every wormhole is also a mirror, not just a passage through space, but a reflection in the fabric of existence itself. When physicists sketch the mathematics of such tunnels, the diagrams look less like roads and more like folded paper, the edges bending inward until distant points almost kiss. To step across would not simply be to travel. It would be to gaze into a surface that asks silently, "Who are you? And what is it that you expect to find on the other side?" We often imagine wormholes as shortcuts, as cracks in the cosmic pavement leading to other stars, other galaxies, other universes beyond reach. But the idea of a mirror suggests something more intimate, something unsettling in its closeness. For what if the tunnel does not open into another place at all? but into another possibility of ourselves, a shadow self, a life that could have been an echo carried forward by the strange mathematics of spacetime. The science itself whispers in favor of such speculation. Relativity teaches us that space and time are woven together, and that bending one inevitably bends the other. A wormhole, then, is not merely a hole through distance, but a distortion of memory, a crease in the page where timelines could overlap. The traveler does not just move across a distance, they ripple across possibility. They might emerge in another epoch, another century, where their own footsteps already rest in the dust. And here lies the mirror. If the wormhole can bend time, then it can fold our story back upon itself, making the traveler not only an explorer, but also a witness. Imagine arriving somewhere, only to meet the trace of yourself already there, a fossil of your own choices, a whisper of your own breath suspended in alien air. Would it feel like discovery, or would it feel like recognition? The way a dream sometimes reveals to us something we had always known, yet never admitted aloud. Scientists talk of Einstein-Rosen bridges, equations balancing precariously on the knife edge between collapse and expansion. But the imagination is not bound by equations, and so we picture these bridges as luminous tunnels, corridors of bent starlight stretching infinitely ahead. Yet every tunnel, no matter how radiant, must have walls, and on those walls could be etched not maps of galaxies, but patterns we recognize too intimately, the contour of a face, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the hidden language of our own DNA. If entropy governs all things, perhaps wormholes to decay not into silence but into memory. They may trap impressions, echoes, the way fossils trap the outline of vanished creatures. Crossing through might be less like stepping onto foreign soil, and more like walking into a hall of reflections, where countless versions of ourselves shimmer like mirages, each slightly different, each carrying the weight of choices never made. Would we stop and stare at them, or would we keep moving, fearful that too long a glance might anchor us forever in regret? What makes this thought tender is not its strangeness, but its familiarity. Mirrors have always unsettled us. In ancient myths, they are portals. In dreams, they are riddles. In waking life, they are reminders that the face we carry is both known and unknowable. To place a mirror at the center of the cosmos is to suggest that the universe is not just expanding outward, but also folding back inward, asking itself who it is and who it has been. Could it be that wormholes are less about geography than about intimacy? Not shortcuts across galaxies, but bridges into the very nature of identity, cracks in reality through which the self peers at the self. Maybe the traveler is not the body that enters, but the memory that emerges, shaped anew by having seen itself from another angle. Maybe what returns is never quite what left. Some theorists wonder if traversing a wormhole might cause paradoxes, loops where cause and effect lose their grip. But perhaps what we call paradox is only another kind of reflection, a story folded upon itself so tightly that beginnings and endings blur. What if entering a wormhole is simply to enter a mirror, and what greets us on the other side is not contradiction but continuation, a sentence that doubles back yet still carries meaning? And if so, then wormholes are not exotic rarities, but reminders of something we live with every day. For every memory is a wormhole, Every dream is a tunnel. Every reflection in water or glass is a bridge between worlds that almost touch. We step into them softly, without thinking. We lose ourselves in them, if only for a breath. And when we step back, we are not the same. Perhaps that is the true mirror of wormholes, not because they show us alien galaxies, but because they remind us that even here, even now, we are already travelers, already wandering between what was and what might be. Every reflection is a question. Every question is a passage. And every passage leads deeper, not outward, but inward. And yet, if mirrors like these lie hidden in the folds of space, if tunnels of reflection crisscross the unseen architecture of the cosmos, then one cannot help but wonder if stepping through them shows us who we might have been. What might it reveal about who we still could become? Loneliness is not always a human invention, nor just a fleeting feeling in the private chambers of the mind. It can be sensed across the fabric of existence itself, as if the universe has written solitude into its very equations. When we speak of loneliness, we are not only speaking of a person alone in a room, but of stars suspended in a vacuum so vast they will never meet another, of ancient forests standing in silence after the last bird has flown away, of the fossils buried beneath oceans, whispering of creatures that have no descendants left to call their name. Loneliness begins to look less like a psychological state and more like a force of nature, steady, invisible, shaping things quietly the way gravity shapes the curve of space. Consider gravity for a moment. It is everywhere, pulling everything inward, holding planets close to their suns, moons to their planets, oceans to the surface of the earth. It binds and it tethers, and yet in the same motion it creates separations, stretches the dark like elastic, thinning the spaces where no light dares to wander. What if loneliness, in its own intangible way, behaves like this too? Not only drawing us into ourselves, but also pulling us apart from others, creating wide gulfs of silence, unseen but deeply felt, between one consciousness and another. When a volcano erupts and lava flows down a mountain, the landscape it leaves behind is often barren, stripped of life, emptied of sound, except for the cooling hiss of stone. That barrenness is not only geological, it feels emotional too. The earth knows silence. The earth knows abandonment. If continents could speak, if the rocks beneath us had memory we could decipher, perhaps they would tell us that to drift alone across the sea, separated from the great body of a supercontinent, is a kind of geologic loneliness. Apart into pieces, and those pieces still move, inch by inch, across the deep floor of time. And in that drifting, they echo the way we drift from one another. Not out of choice, always, but because the forces that move us are larger than will, larger than thought. Loneliness touches the fossils we find in desert stone. Each fossil is the echo of a body once held within a crowd, a school of fish, a herd of mammals, a colony of trilobites. Yet now, each bone is separated from its living context, entombed in quiet mineral. The shell of an ammonite may be perfectly preserved, its spirals crisp as if carved yesterday, but it sits there alone, the rest of its world gone. The record of life on Earth is not only a record of abundance, but of absences, the solitude of species erased from memory, their names forgotten, except as impressions in stone. And isn't this what loneliness feels like? to be preserved in form, but without the living company that once gave the form meaning. Perhaps this is why loneliness weighs on us so heavily. It is not just a fleeting feeling, but something primal, something written into the very arrangement of atoms, into the mathematics of entropy. Entropy ensures that all systems move toward disorder, toward dispersion, toward the scattering of energy. In the human soul, entropy may feel like the scattering of connection, the dimming of shared warmth, the drift toward separateness, not because we choose it, but because time is always carrying things away. Friends leave, memories fade. The neurons in the brain, once tightly connected, begin to lose their bonds in age, leaving us stranded in our own recollections. And yet, loneliness is not only emptiness. Sometimes it is the very thing that reveals to us what matters most. The absence of a voice makes us treasure it more dearly. The distance of stars makes us long for their light with aching wonder. A silence in the forest allows us to notice the single rustle of a leaf, the single wing-beat of a moth. Loneliness sharpens attention. It makes the smallest presence feel infinite. Could it be, then, that loneliness is not only a void but a magnifying glass, showing us details we would never have seen if the noise had remained? In cosmology, there is something called the cosmic void, vast regions of space, almost completely empty of galaxies. They stretch for hundreds of millions of light years, cold, dark, nearly abandoned. Walls of galaxies, luminous filaments of stars strung together like beads. It is as if the universe requires loneliness, requires absence, to carve out the structures that give the rest of the cosmos shape. What if our lives are like this too? What if the dark corridors of solitude within us are not meaningless, but the very architecture that allows our brighter connections to shine? Maybe loneliness is not the opposite of connection, but its shadow, necessary for depth, necessary for contrast, like valleys that give shape to mountains, or the silence between notes that allows music to breathe. We resist it because it feels heavy, like a weight pressing down, but perhaps this weight is only another kind of gravity, drawing us closer to what we truly long for, reminding us of the delicate threads that hold us in place. And so, loneliness is not just a state of mind. It is a landscape. It is a geological force. It is a cosmic truth. It is a tide that rises and falls, a silence that hums in every corner of time. We are shaped by it, carved by it, stretched across it, like stars across the void. And yet, loneliness itself can be a force of nature. Then what other, unseen emotions might also live hidden in the laws of physics, quietly moving the universe in ways we have barely begun to notice? Before leaving, we must face the galaxies themselves do not stay still. They merge, they consume, they transform. And if we speak of eternity as though it were something solid and unmoving, we forget that even the most immense structures we can imagine are also drifting toward change. The Milky Way is not a fixed, eternal island in the dark, but a great spiral set adrift on invisible tides, and on the far horizon, the Andromeda galaxy approaches like a ghost ship across the cosmic sea. The motion is so slow, it seems motionless, and yet the fate is sealed, written in the quiet mathematics of gravity. One day, in 4 billion years or so, the two will meet. Not in a violent crash like stone on stone, but in a dance so stretched across time that no creature could witness it whole. Stars will glide past one another in vast arcs, most never touching, their distances so immense that even in collision there will be almost no impact. What collides are not stars, but their orbits, their paths, their gravitational harmonies. The Milky Way will lose its shape, its delicate spiral arms dissolving, curling, drawn out like silk pulled into water. Andromeda too will be stretched, folded, unmade. Out of this dissolving, something new will emerge, an elliptical galaxy, swollen, glowing, quieter in its structure, like two rivers joining until you can no longer tell which was which. And if there are eyes to watch, if some descendants of life remain, they will not see destruction but transformation. The night sky, instead of the familiar band of our Milky Way, will blaze with arcs of stars, whole fields of light doubled, scattered, rearranged. For billions of years the sky will change slowly, steadily, subtly, until one night does not look like the next, and the familiar constellations will dissolve into unrecognizable patterns. What once was our North Star will drift into obscurity. What once was Orion will melt into nothing. Every map of the heavens will become obsolete. It is strange to think that the galaxy itself is temporary, that the place we think of as our forever home is only passing through one form of its life. Galaxies are not still frames, they are stories, unfolding across time too wide for us to hold. They grow when they consume smaller galaxies. They scatter their stars like seeds. They breathe in cycles of birth and death. The Milky Way itself bears scars of old collisions, faint tidal streams, of stars still circling us like remnants of forgotten meals. To look carefully at the halo around us is to see bones of other galaxies, stretched thin, digested, remembered only in their fragments. Maybe this is what all things do. They gather, they dissolve, they become something else, and in becoming, they forget their old shape. And maybe memory itself is like that too. We merge with what we encounter. We fold old selves into new selves, and the shapes of who we were blur into something larger, harder to define. The galaxy is not alone in its amnesia. We too forget, and perhaps we must. Astronomers tell us that even as galaxies collide, stars are born. In the turbulence, in the stretched gas and dust, new suns ignite. That which is scattered becomes fertile, and in the wake of destruction, light returns. Perhaps that is the secret rhythm of the universe. Not that it resists collision, but that, in collision, it finds a way to make more light. We might wonder what this means for us, here, so impossibly small, so impossibly short-lived compared to that future horizon. Does it matter to know that in billions of years the Milky Way will no longer exist as we know it? Maybe not. But maybe it offers a kind of humility, a reminder that even what feels permanent is only waiting to be reshaped. Our worries, our monuments, our civilizations, all of it feels so lasting, but none of it will survive the merging of galaxies. And yet, the atoms within us, the carbon and oxygen and iron, they will drift on, scattered, absorbed, spun into new stars, new planets, new skies we cannot imagine, in a way that is immortality, not of the self, but of the pieces that make the self possible. Andromeda comes silently, invisibly. If you look up tonight, you may see it, a faint blur, a smear of light just above the horizon in the right season. It looks fragile, almost nothing, and yet it is an empire of stars, larger than our own. That blur is the future of our sky. That blur is destiny, arriving without hurry. It is a reminder that nothing in the universe stands still, and even what feels infinite is in motion toward change. Is it frightening or is it comforting to know that the very galaxy is not fixed, that nothing endures as it is? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is only frightening when we cling to the idea of permanence, only comforting when we see ourselves as part of the same flowing river. The Milky Way will dissolve, but in dissolving it will become something new, something unseen, something waiting, and we will never know it firsthand. By the time the first arcs of light begin to twist, the Earth will be long gone, the sun swollen and extinguished. We are spectators only for the earliest moments, able to imagine, but never to witness. Our role is not to see the whole story, but to sense the direction, to know that change is the essence of all things, whether galaxies or lives. And yet, if this much can be lost, if even galaxies themselves can merge and erase their shapes, what else might we have forgotten? What other collisions have already passed into silence, hidden in the deep night we no longer remember? We imagine a map, not of oceans or mountains, not of continents or stars, but of something stranger, softer, more hidden, a map of wormholes, invisible threads stretching silently across the universe, unseen corridors curling through folds of space-time. It is not a map with borders or directions, not a chart that could ever be printed on paper or pinned to a wall, but an atlas that exists only in whispers, in mathematics, in possibility. The mind drifts when it thinks of such a thing. What would it mean to hold a map that has no edges? Wormholes, as the scientists call them, are not proven bridges, but they are not ruled out either. They exist in equations, balanced delicately on the chalkboards of physics, like faint footprints left in snow that has long since melted. They emerge naturally from the mathematics of relativity, curved tunnels connecting distant points, as if space itself were willing to fold over and touch. Imagine folding a piece of paper until 2 points align. Then piercing a hole through them, the distance shrinks, the path collapses, the impossible becomes almost ordinary. But the universe is not paper, and the folds it makes are not so simple. They ripple with gravity, with uncertainty, with questions that no hand can smooth. If such a network exists, it would be older than stars, older than light itself. Invisible roads carved into the body of the cosmos before galaxies had even spun their first arms. Perhaps they are fossils of creation, wrinkles left over from the violent expansion that once tore time apart and spread matter into its endless sea. If we could see them, maybe they would form constellations stranger than any we've charted lines, not drawn by starlight but by absence, by silence, by shortcuts through infinity. To think of traveling them is to dream in contradictions. A wormhole must be stable to be crossed, but everything we know says stability is rare, fleeting, fragile. Gravity wants to close it, entropy wants to erase it, time wants to grind it down. Could it be that such roads flicker only for instants, like fireflies, appearing and vanishing before any traveler could pass? Or is it possible that entire galaxies are linked in ways we cannot yet see, that civilizations, if they exist beyond us, might have long learned to step between these doors, as casually as walking from one room to the next. A map without edges would not guide us the way our maps do now. There would be no north or south, no east or west. The directions would be stranger, toward denser time, toward thinner gravity, toward distances that bend instead of stretch. Perhaps even the idea of distance itself would vanish, replaced by a sense of proximity that has nothing to do with space. Imagine if the farthest galaxy could be reached in the time it takes a heart to beat. Imagine if the place you dreamed of was not far away, but folded against you, waiting for the right alignment to open. Yet such imagination always drifts back to uncertainty. If these tunnels exist, where do they lead? Do they connect not only space but time as well? Could you step through one and find yourself not only elsewhere but elsewhere, maybe into the future, where stars we see today have already burned to ash? Maybe into the past, where Earth was still molten and airless, or maybe into something stranger still, a place with no before or after, only the endless now. A wormhole could be a path, or a trap, or a mirror. It could be the quickest road to truth, or the gentlest way into oblivion. There is a softness in wondering about things that may never be built, never be touched. We do not need to walk these invisible corridors to feel their weight on our thoughts. The equations alone are enough to stir a quiet awe, to remind us that the universe may still hold architectures we cannot yet imagine. And sometimes that is enough, that in the silence between stars there may be roads more intricate than veins in a leaf, more hidden than roots in a forest, more endless than thought itself. The question that lingers is not only whether such a map exists, but whether we, with our fragile senses and short lives, would even recognize it if it were placed before us. Would we see it as a grid of tunnels, a lattice of light, or something beyond geometry entirely? Would we understand its language, or would it look like meaningless noise until the right moment, the right insight, the right consciousness arrived to decode it? Maybe we are already surrounded by signs of this hidden cartography, too subtle for our eyes, too quiet for our machines. Maybe the universe is whispering its coordinates in the background radiation, in the trembling of atoms, in the patterns we have not yet learned to hear, and still, in the soft dark of night, the thought persists. A map with no edges is a map without limits. It cannot be held, cannot be finished, cannot be drawn to scale. To follow it would mean surrendering the comfort of borders, of certainty, of knowing where we are. It would mean stepping into a geography where up and down, near and far, beginning and end dissolve. Perhaps such a map is not meant to be traveled, but only imagined, a reminder that the universe is larger than our hands can hold, more intricate than our minds can fix. And yet, if wormholes sketch a hidden atlas across the sky, if these invisible roads crisscross the cosmos like veins of possibility, then we are left with a question both delicate and vast. Who, if anyone, has walked them before? And if such paths are real, then what else might we have overlooked? What other maps might lie waiting in the folds of the unknown? If wormholes bend space and time, perhaps they also store echoes of everything that passes through. Perhaps every crossing leaves an inscription in the fabric of the cosmos, not carved in stone, but in a trembling geometry that holds what once was, what still lingers, what refuses to be erased. The idea feels strange, almost childlike, and yet it hums with a quiet plausibility, for space itself has always been more than emptiness. It has always carried traces, like a field that remembers footsteps long after the walker has gone. Imagine a wormhole as not only a bridge, but a vault, a chamber where the particles of light and matter that fall within are not merely transported but imprinted, where the vibration of their presence leaves a faint afterimage, the way heat clings to the air after a body leaves a room. We know that particles interact with fields, that gravity distorts spacetime, that the smallest perturbation ripples outward like a stone thrown into a pond. Could it be, then, that wormholes are the great scribes of the universe, capturing not the words of history, but its unspoken murmurs, the invisible pulse of everything that has dared to pass through? Science tells us that memory, in the human brain, is not stored in one place, but scattered in synaptic networks. Patterns of electricity and chemistry woven into living tissue. If the mind remembers through patterns, perhaps the cosmos does as well. A wormhole, folding space into itself, might operate like a colossal neuron, firing signals across impossible distances, strengthening pathways with every traversal. Perhaps the universe itself learns. Perhaps it cannot help but accumulate memory, not because it chooses to, but because the geometry demands it. And if this is true, then what is memory at the scale of stars and galaxies? It may not resemble recollection, as we know it, with clear images and stories, but something deeper, more diffuse. A memory not of events, but of impressions, not of language, but of resonance. Just as fossils are not the creature itself, but the stone shadow it leaves behind. Wormholes may keep fossilized vibrations of passage, the faintest echoes of journeys long dissolved. A ship traveling through a beam of light, a cloud of dust, all might leave behind the whisper of their transit, hidden in the folds, waiting, fading, persisting. What if wormholes were not only shortcuts, but archives, ancient libraries of forgotten motion? And what if, in their unfathomable depths, one could listen, not with ears, but with instruments tuned to the language of geometry itself, to the way spacetime flexes and hums? Maybe the echoes are there, hidden, waiting for us to decode. Maybe each wormhole is a diary the universe has kept, though it never meant to write. We might ask, then, whether memory and time are not different at all, but the same phenomenon viewed from different angles. Memory is time held within the present, and wormholes bend time back into itself, forcing yesterday and tomorrow into contact. Could the wormhole's memory be not only of what passed through, but of what will pass through, already inscribed, because time does not flow as we think, but stands still and infinite, waiting to be traversed? The physics grows slippery here, as it always does at the edge of understanding. Quantum entanglement, black hole information paradoxes, the strange permanence of entropy, all hint that information is never truly lost, that the universe keeps its records even when the pages burn. Hawking suggested that black holes evaporate, but do not forget that every particle swallowed is still there in some hidden code. Wormholes might be similar, custodians of secrets, guardians of passage, unwilling archivists of journeys across the void. But what does it mean to imagine the cosmos remembering us? To consider that our movements, our explorations, our tiny vessels sent into the dark, are not swallowed whole but inscribed, faintly, delicately, forever. It brings a strange comfort, this idea that nothing is truly erased, that somewhere, even in silence, there is a trace of us. Not because we are important, not because the universe cares, but because memory is inevitable, because space-time itself cannot help but hold the shape of what moves within it. And yet, memory is not always clear. In us, it fades, it shifts, it distorts. Could the memories of wormholes be just as fragile? Perhaps the echoes blur together, indistinguishable, ancient light, braided with new, until the archive becomes noise. Or perhaps wormhole memory is sharper than ours, crystalline, perfect, infinite in capacity, holding every particle with unwavering precision. Which is more terrifying, a cosmos that remembers everything, or a cosmos that remembers nothing at all? We can picture, if only for a moment, drifting near such a structure, an opening in space-time itself, and feeling not only the gravity, but the presence, as though the wormhole were not just a hole, but a mind, as though it watched, not with intention, but with accumulation. To fall within it might be to become a part of its memory, to leave behind the trace of our existence, forever imprinted in the folds of geometry. And maybe, in some distant age, when no stars remain and galaxies have dissolved into dust, the memory of those who once were might still ripple inside the wormhole's hidden archive, the final record of a universe that once dreamed of itself. Perhaps this is why the idea feels so familiar, because memory is the one thing we know deeply, the one thing that defines us. Without memory, there is no self, no continuity, no story. Without memory, there is only the moment, endlessly repeating, endlessly erased. And if wormholes are memory machines, then perhaps they are the cosmos' way of resisting erasure, of keeping a story, even when the storyteller is gone. And yet, if wormholes remember, if space-time itself cannot forget, then what else might be hidden in the deep archives of the universe, waiting silently, patiently, like pages unread in a book no one knows how to open? Do we ever truly return from such a journey? Or does leaving the Milky Way mean leaving behind who we were? Return becomes less about distance and more about identity. And in the quiet shadows of that question, time itself begins to soften, as though it too is uncertain about what coming back even means. A person who drifts beyond the spiral arms of our galaxy, slipping past the familiar stars, would not only be crossing space, but also dissolving into another kind of memory, one that belongs not to Earth or to humankind, but to the universe itself. To return, then, would not be the same as retracing steps on a map, but more like asking a wave to find its place again in the ocean once it has already broken on the shore. When we leave, something changes in the marrow of who we are. Scientists sometimes say that time, when experienced at great speeds or within immense gravitational fields, bends and warps until even the idea of simultaneity fractures. A traveler who wandered too far might carry inside their very atoms the memory of that bending, the imprint of a time that does not flow evenly, and in their return, they would bring that distortion back like a faint echo. Could they stand again on Earth and see it as it was, or would they always see a slightly different shade of it, a world both familiar and distant? A home that feels like a photograph rather than a presence. Perhaps this is the truest meaning of entropy, not only the gradual drift of energy into disorder, but the impossibility of exact repetition. No moment can be lived twice, no path can be fully retraced, no identity can be perfectly restored after departure. The fossils embedded in stone remind us of this. Bones turn to mineral, once living beings that can never return to the warmth of their own blood. They are here with us, preserved in form, but they are no longer what they were. And in a softer way, perhaps the same is true of us when we imagine leaving the galaxy and then returning, carrying within us both the familiarity of where we came from and the transformation of what we have seen. There is a tenderness in asking if return is even possible, because it is a question that stretches beyond astronomy into the quiet core of human memory. When you leave a place you once loved and visit again many years later, it is not the same. The air smells different, the buildings stand in silence. People you once knew are gone or older, and even if the place itself has remained unchanged, you have not. You return, but you do not return as the same person who left, and in that small fracture, something sacred hides. Could it be that the same law holds true on cosmic scales, that the traveler who drifts into another galaxy and dares to come back will not be the same, and the galaxy itself will not be the same either? The Milky Way is not a fixed photograph. Its stars are moving in great sweeps, its arms twist and drift, its gas clouds collapse and reignite in cycles of birth and death. To return even after 1,000,000 years would be to find a different home, one with new constellations, missing stars, rearranged skies. We like to think of constellations as eternal, but they are not. They are temporary alignments, momentary shapes across a canvas that will shift and scatter over time. So then, what does it mean to return, if even the sky itself does not remain? Maybe return is not about going back to what was, but about recognizing what endures within us. The isotopes in our bones carry records of the Earth's oceans and air, subtle ratios of oxygen and carbon that trace the conditions of the atmosphere when we breathed. The iron that flows in our blood is older than the planet itself, forged in long-dead stars before the Earth was even born. If we leave and return, it may be this elemental continuity that grounds us, a reminder that though our memories and identities shift, the atoms themselves still carry the echoes of home. And yet, even atoms decay, even protons may not be immortal. And if matter itself is subject to eventual dissolution, then the very idea of return becomes another story we tell ourselves to soften the impermanence of being. We may hope to come back, but the universe may only offer us transformation, a continuous unfolding into something else. Not because it is cruel, but because it is vast, because it does not know how to hold still. Is it possible then that the longing to return is not about place at all, but about the desire to remain ourselves, unaltered by time, untouched by entropy? We wish to come back as the same person, to hold again the same world, but deep down we know it cannot be so. Maybe this is why journeys, whether across galaxies or across a single lifetime, carries such weight. They remind us that identity is not fixed, that return is always partial, always refracted through the changes we have carried along the way. And if return is only partial, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the beauty lies not in reclaiming what was, but in holding the paradox of both continuity and change. A galaxy glimpsed from afar will never look the same again when seen up close, just as a childhood home will never feel the same when revisited. But both hold truth, both hold fragments of who we are. And in that gentle tension, something deeply human stirs. And so the question of return remains unresolved, suspended like starlight traveling across immeasurable distances. We may leave, we may come back, but we will not be the same, and neither will the universe. And yet, if this much can shift in the act of leaving and coming back, what else might await us in the journeys still ahead? What happens after the attempt, after the crossing, after the silence? Perhaps the only answer is the continued asking of questions. Because silence is not the absence of sound, but the weight of something unspoken, lingering like the afterglow of a fire that has already gone out. When the question has been asked, when the mind has stretched itself to the edge of what it knows, there is a pause, a stillness that carries the residue of wonder. It is the kind of silence that exists at the bottom of the sea, where no light reaches, where the sediments of time fall grain by grain into an unseen eternity. It is the kind of silence that wraps itself around ancient stones and fossilized bones, holding the memory of entire worlds that once were loud with life in the vastness of deep time. Silence is not empty, but full, layered with echoes. Every question humanity has ever asked has left a faint trace, a ripple, as if the act of wondering itself adds something to the fabric of existence. And perhaps what comes after the question is not an answer at all, but the realization that the question was always enough. Maybe it is not resolution we seek, but the comfort of reaching outward, the movement of thought across centuries, like a tide rising and falling against the shore. The ocean does not ask if it will ever arrive. It simply moves endlessly, without conclusion. When we look at the fragments of ancient shells buried in limestone, or the faint isotopes locked within the crystals of a mountain, we find that questions live there too. How did this shell come to rest so high above the sea? How many storms swept across this stone before it became solid enough to last? Each layer is a question, each fossil a whisper that something lived, something died, something continued without us. And in the silence of the rocks, we hear not answers, but an invitation to listen more deeply, to lean into the unspoken. Perhaps the silence after the question is a mirror showing us ourselves. In asking, we reveal what we fear and what we love, what we cannot let go of, and what we secretly hope might still be found. When we ask where we came from, or where the vanished civilizations of the ocean floor went, we are really asking how fragile we are, and how easily we too might be erased. When we ask whether the universe remembers us, we are asking whether we can bear to be forgotten. The silence after the question does not reply, but it reflects. And in that reflection, we see the trembling outline of our own need to matter. In science, silence often follows discovery. A fossil uncovered, an isotope measured, a pattern glimpsed. In the stars, there is the rush of recognition, and then the long pause, as if the universe has offered a clue but refuses to go further. The silence waits for the next question, as though reminding us that no measurement, no finding, no map of the cosmos will ever close the circle. Every answer only deepens the mystery. Every attempt only leads to another crossing. And yet, this silence is not cruel. It is patient, it is vast. It allows us to rest inside it, to lie awake at night and wonder, to drift toward sleep while thinking of mountains still being born in the dark seabed, of continents slowly drifting apart as if pulled by invisible threads, of stars that exploded long before there were eyes to see them. It allows us to live in the gentle rhythm of maybe, maybe not, maybe forever. The silence after the question is not a void, but a kind of cradle, rocking us between what we know and what we will never touch. If the rocks could speak, they would not answer, but ask in return, "Who are you to measure us? Who are you to think your words will last longer than the wind?" And maybe that is the true gift of silence, that it does not satisfy but stirs, that it does not close the door but leaves it half open, letting the shadows breathe across the threshold. The question remains, and the silence deepens around. It's not because there is nothing more to say, but because there is always more waiting. And so we arrive at this strange moment, the question hanging, the silence stretching, the attempt behind us, the crossing already made. We sit in the quiet, feeling the pulse of time beneath our feet, feeling the hush of oceans above buried mountains, feeling the stillness of the stars. And as the silence thickens, we begin to sense it, the next question already forming, waiting for us to notice. Because if this much can be left unresolved, if this much can slip beyond our grasp, then perhaps the silence is not the end at all, but the beginning of the next wonder.